The man sat by the fence, defeated by the girl. He realized that one must think in such a way as to sincerely wish to destroy. The girl stared coldly into the gaze of the man she had just wounded. The man could do nothing, as it was too late. The sword had gone through his heart. The defeated man still thought she was beautiful, primarily because he couldn't defeat her. The man's hand that was trying to touch her face fell to the ground. She made sure he was deceased. There was an annulment of the engagement for the reason of destroying Declan. The system reported that the end of the episode had occurred and congratulated the player for completing that episode of the game. The guy was very happy that finally the game worked as it should without any third-party lags. The player put all the effort into this game character. He managed to fix a bug popping up during the voiding of duties. Kim Woojin was the character designer. He decided there was enough overtime for the day. The console game development company REW in South Korea, where there was no place for the world of console games, suddenly began to distribute its products, and after a while, this company was already known all over the world. The game that Kim Woojin was testing was a pretty high-budget game that the company had invested all of its money and revenue into. Kim Woojin realized that they would be fired if there was anything wrong with the game and saw that his playing time was 11 hours. The essence of the game was that its difficulty and the course of the story depended on the player's choices. Despite the fact that this game was designed for single-player play, it added artificial intelligence and named characters. Such development attracted much more attention of the audience. The coolest thing is the overabundance of different classes like knights, mages, explorers, demons, demon hunters, nobles, kings. Thanks to the fact that the set of roles refreshed players were free to choose positions in the game. Kim Woojin realized that if this game was popular, their company would make a lot of money. But if the game failed in sales, they would be screwed. The developer decided to check once again the character customization. The reason he has been blatantly recycling for the last few months, it was a playable character. The main character in the episode that Kim Woojin was testing was Decline von Graham Ukline. This character was one of the game's intermediate bosses and treated as a villain. There were endless attempts to fix bugs due to possible plot ramifications with the main character, and the developer finally managed to finish it without a single bug. The cause of death of the game character was a knife wound inflicted by the bride. The developer made sure that everything was planned to perfection and decided that now he could take a break. Suddenly, he was approached by a female employee who asked to know how to take his test. The girl was Kim Woojin's crew chief, and her name was Inwoo Ara. She was also his ex-girlfriend. They were together for 7 years. All the time they spent together was filled with true happiness. Kim Woojin was by nature quite lazy, but she, unlike him, was a born workaholic. He also had ambitions to become a better employee, but eventually they broke up. Despite Inwoo Ara's efforts, Kim Woojin did not change in any way, and this was the reason for the end of their relationship. The girl heard he was struggling with bugs. 6 months later, Kim Woojin found out she found someone else. The developer thought she was doing well with her new boyfriend. Inwoo Ara didn't expect to hear that. The girl realized that in this company, gossip spreads at the speed of light, and assured him that she was doing great. He was very pleased to hear it from her. Kim Woojin announced that he will be cheering for their wedding. The girl asked to stop being nice and go back to bugs. The supervisor pointed out that the developer would need to fix some things, and they changed some details towards the end of the story. The guy asked if she was sure this character was the boss because he looked kinda squishy. Inwoo Ara explained that this was the essence of the charm because the further the scenario went, the stronger Decline became. The difficulty of the game depended on the player's personal choices. The boss said that the prototype for this character was Kim Woojin himself, who was surprised by this. The girl thought it was strange that he didn't notice it, assuring that they were like twin brothers. Kim Woojin had met the artist a couple times in his life. Inwoo Ara said that's why she destroyed Declan as soon as she started playing, adding that their personalities are also similar. The boss decided to stop ranting and asked how things were going with the testing. The developer said that the game itself was fun, but he didn't like the fact that the fate of the entire company depended on its success. The girl assured that he should not worry about it because everything will go without problems. Trailer of the game exploded all the charts. The developer asked if her boyfriend was waiting for her. Inva Ara came to her senses because indeed she already had a lover waiting for her. The guy was waiting for his girlfriend on the street at the car and decided that it was time to say goodbye because it was late outside. Kim Woojin advised the supervisor not to keep her lover waiting for her. The girl said goodbye to the developer, wishing him good luck. He also said goodbye to her. The developer, left alone, went back to testing Decline von Graham Ukline. The guy made sure the artist was harsh. He thought he didn't look like this game character. He was possessing a combination of prodigy and standard mage. When Decline was a child, he was dubbed a genius of magic and put on a pedestal. But in reality, he was a rather mediocre mage, average among children of his age. Decline, because of his arrogance and belonging to the nobility, eventually became an insufferable person. The developer knew that as the story progressed, he was going to become even stronger. But at the moment, he was only surrounded by haters. Kim Woojin decided to add some extra attribute to it that would catch the eye. The guy knew that Declan would still be modeled only after him. He decided to look up the attributes of understanding, assuming it was something like empathy. Kim Woojin decided to make more empathy than in himself, and since he went to these settings, he decided to add Magic Touch Midas, Sharp Vision, and Iron Man skill. The developer ended up just adding all the good features at all, and now he was embarrassed about it. The guy decided to put things back the way they were so there wouldn't be any problems. After a while, Kim Woo-jin decided to rest for a while, but then a sudden notification came in that it was an author who could make adjustments to the game model. The interlocutor said he just wanted to see the result Kim Woo-jin received and did not refuse. The developer suggested that he wanted to look at the model itself, but the interviewee said he wanted to look out of the window. He didn't understand what he meant. Looking out the window, the guy noticed the thickening clouds that formed a funnel and thunder was heard. Noticing what was happening, the man thought it was too suspicious. She began to worry. The developer saw that there was a hole in the sky and lightning struck him, and he didn't realize what had happened to him. Finding himself in an unknown place, he noticed a silhouette assuming it was him, but also didn't realize who it was. An unknown voice asked him not to forget and to always be on guard with him. Declan couldn't be tamed. Even if he hesitated, he could throw something out at any time. The guy was informed that he was now simply underestimating his acquired talents. Declan von Grahan was the very real villain of the game that Kim Woo-jin fell into. Suddenly, someone started yelling, ordering Declan to get out of bed immediately. When he opened his eyes, he saw a girl in front of him who was angry at him for sleeping too much. The maid tried to calm the mistress down. Kim Woo-jin had been in this body for a few days now, and he still felt like he was just dreaming. The girl asked him how long he was going to stay locked up because of some woman, saying that he would dishonor their family by doing so. The interlocutor had left him the papers, and if he didn't want to lose his position as professor before, should get out of bed. With the appearance of those strange clouds, Kim Woo-jin woke up in that strange body. Since then, a whole week had passed. The developer fell into the world of the game that he himself, and made sure of it, seeing painfully familiar landscape. Kim Woo-jin realized he was in the body of the worst character in the entire game, a character who can't escape his demise no matter what he does. A man destined to die, he started packing to avoid losing his professorship. Kim Woo-jin became the villain of the game Declan von Grahan, knowing what lay ahead of him. The developer was at Ukline Manor in Declan's chambers, and it had already been 2 weeks since he had come to this world. At first he thought it was just a dream, but after a few days a sense of reality forced him to accept the truth. Kim Woo-jin assumed that he had died from that lightning strike and gone to the afterlife, but one thing he knew for sure. The developer became the villain of the game, which he himself and created such seemed to him simply impossible because he was an ordinary office worker. Declan von Grahan was the intermediate boss of this game that he was destined to face whichever path the player chose. The game character was the root of all problems, the common enemy, the source of pain of countless characters. Kim Woo-jin didn't understand why he became this particular villain. Another problem was that he had no idea what part of the story he was in. The only thing he knew was the amount of mana available to him, but even so he had no idea how fast it was running out. Realizing that he couldn't prepare for anything at this rate, Kim Woo-jin will not lie if he says that during the development, everyone, including himself, tested the game thousands of times, and that this character survived only once. Declan was only created as a villain who has to play the role of an intermediate boss and die. The guy saw the very document the girl had left behind to Professor Declan from the Imperial University, had a basic understanding of magic. Juriel von Grahan was the same woman who had thrown him a pile of papers while he slept. She was Declan's half-sister. Also in Declan's palace, she acted as the head of the Ukline family. They were not on the best of terms with her. The woman Juriel mentioned was Julia, whom the developer knew well. Julia's storyline was to destroy her lover. Kim Woo-jin believed something had happened to her at this point. The developer remembered a past conversation with Declan's half-sister and realized that he was a professor and today was supposed to be lecture day. The guy decides that he needs to go to university, but he has never given a lecture before, and he needs to take some action to get more information. Upon his awakening, he began to see texts above his head, and the main goal of survival was to become useful to the game. A side quest was to give a lecture at the university. The developer thought it was all Juriel's fault. Because of her, he had to do something. There were several outcomes in which Juriel was the cause of Declan's death. The guy understood that the currency in the store was extremely important, but he didn't understand what he should do at the lecture itself, but afterwards decided that he had no reason to worry. Declan's body possessed the attribute of understanding. The ability to understand anything could be activated by mana. Kim Woo-jin, before becoming Declan von Grahan, gave him this attribute so he could gain some empathy. The comprehension attribute was unique and appeared in the game itself. Much later, the developer assumed it had some hidden effects. Kim Woo-jin didn't recall these clothes or the bathroom, but he could still use them without a second thought, and he felt as if he'd been in Declan's body all his life. Normally, the developer would be extremely uncomfortable in such clothes, but now he was comfortable in them and felt quite elegant. Declan's additional attributes were blackmail and nobility, as well as a sense of aesthetics. Kim Woo-jin felt as if everything around him was trying to tell him that this body was now his. The developer couldn't break the rules that the body adhered to. What Kim Woo-jin found uncomfortable for this body was the norm. Even though his main goal was to gather information, This walk to his first lecture felt too natural. Now Kim Woo-jin was an outstanding and valuable nobleman who had power. The developer had a perfectly ordinary name for a man from South Korea, as well as being tall and handsome. The guy remembered the last girl's words about him being a pathetic, lazy fool, and now he was in Declane's body. Kim Woo-jin couldn't forget this fact. He also realized that he should have remained vigilant. The developer had never before driven such an expensive car. He got into the car that was to take him to the university. Kim Woo-jin thought of expensive cars, and the memory of In-woo Era's boyfriend immediately popped into his head. The guy noticed another game character next to him and wondered who this young man was. The young man said hello to the professor and handed him some documentation. He didn't understand what it was. The developer speculated that it might be Declan's assistant or secretary. He asked if he was a wizard. Kim Woo-jin realized that he had made a mistake and decided to say that it was a joke. Declan saw that they were documents, though he had previously suspected material about the lecture. The boy noticed that the document contained all the necessary information for the lecture from beginning to end, realizing that it was foolish to think that he personally prepared all these materials, especially if you take into account his arrogance and talentlessness. Kim Woo-jin assumed that this kid had prepared the whole thing. He tried to praise him, but everything blurred in front of him. Declan von Grahan-Uklein praised the boy for the work he'd done, and he didn't expect to hear such words from him. The master allowed him to rest until they got to the place. The driver was shocked that the master had complimented someone. Kim Woo-jin wondered just how awful this game character was. He felt badly for the compliment, deciding that this was Declan's true nature. The developer sensed it as they left their estate, assuming that Declan's consciousness was mingling with his own. The driver announced that they had arrived. Guy realized that Imperial University was Declan's workplace. The letter had mentioned Rotio Hall. The professor made his way to the lecture hall where many students were waiting for the lecture to begin. Students had heard that the professor was a master of interpreting spells. He was considered intelligent. The professor introduced himself as Declan von Grahan-Uklein. He had taken over this class as the head professor of the university's magic tower. Kim Woo-jin and Declan's body decided to start the lecture. All the students fell silent and started listening to him attentively. Some of the female students found this professor very strongly attractive and extremely intelligent. The girl was pleased that she had finally met her father's enemy. This student considered Declan von Grahan-Uklein a scum who did not deserve such admiration. 3 years ago, the student's father passed away, but for many years he had been conducting research related to the interpretation of spells. But because someone took away his dissertation, he fell into despair and killed himself. This man who stole the thesis was dubbed by the people as the genius spell interpreter Declan von Grahan-Uklein. The student realized that there was nothing she could do about it because after her father passed away, she had nothing left. Born into a noble family, she was deprived of all their values, including their family home. With territories in the end, she became an ordinary orphan. Then the girl swore that she would avenge her father. Having made this vow, she entered the Imperial University. But it cost a great effort. One of the professors of this institution was Declan. The girl, unlike the other students, knew the whole truth, being certain that his skills in interpreting spells were pure lies based on her father's accomplishments. The student didn't understand how this man who had destroyed her family could stand here so arrogantly. The young lady was sure that this position was to go to her father. Kim Woo-jin had no idea about it. The girl wanted to reveal the whole truth and finish this man off right during the lecture. The student realized that she had to hold back to overthrow him. She needed to prepare herself properly. The professor asked for silence in the hall, stating that he was starting their lecture. Everyone looked at him attentively. The man introduced himself once again, informing that he was the head professor of this magical tower and part-time mage monarch, controlling the elements. The professor assumed that the students were already aware that there were 3 major attributes and 9 types of magic. Among the attributes were distinguished primary sources representing the basis of all magic elements, having any physical composition, and matter representing something between them. Regarding types, these included spirit summoning, destruction support, reinforcement, manipulation, flexibility, enchantment, and harmony. The professor continued to lecture the students. Kim Woo-jin made sure it was much easier than he thought. Kim Woo-jin's first ever lecture, knowing nothing about magical theory, went well despite the fact that he was reading from a script. The developer understood perfectly well what was written there, but it was not all blackmail and nobility that made everyone focus on him. The skill of elitism kept students interested and made maintaining eye contact all felt extremely natural. The current Declan had all the traits of a good teacher. He informed that the use of mana depended on what part of the body it was stored in. Usually mages stored their mana in their heads, where it was easiest to visualize. The spell knights stored their mana in their hearts and drained it through blood vessels located throughout their bodies. There was a core in which the inner mana was mixed with the outer mana. It was the most versatile place to store mana. The professor wanted to convey to the students the idea of hard work, which was important, but if they had no talent, they should make their choices extremely carefully and focus completely on it. Kim Woo-jin didn't think that Declan would hand out such advice to them. The developer knew that this character was not so talented, despite the fact that his current mana reserve was 3,000 points. There was one mage whose mana reserve left 30,000 points. Kim Woojin was convinced that Decline was giving the students advice that he himself could use to listen to, and the professor said that was the end of their lecture. The final part of the script looked strange. Kim Woojin doubted he should have read it. If the original Decline had been in his place, he wouldn't have read that sentence. The professor asked if the students had any questions on the lecture they heard. None of them said anything. Kim Woojin was glad that no one asked him any questions and was about to leave the room, but suddenly someone turned to him. A student reported that last night a mysterious spell was discovered in the dormitory. People thought the devil himself was behind it. She asked what Professor Decline had to say about it. The professor asked if she was really a student of the university's magic tower. The girl asked what it was about, and the man replied that all students know that you should introduce yourself first. The teacher said he would not answer questions from a child who did not know the basic rules of ethics, and the girl was shocked. Kim Woojin realized that he had no other choice now because he didn't know what to say to her question. The developer realized that understanding was spending too much mana. He had 2,000 out of 3 left for the lecture, took more than 1,000. He handled the scenario but didn't know how much mana it would take to learn an unknown spell. The other students laughed as they heard the professor avoid answering the student's question. Kim Woojin assumed she wanted to be noticed, but it didn't work. The student asked to wait for the professor, saying that at the moment the magic tower refused to analyze this spell, they said it was just a rumor, but she thought that if he took it, he would be able to recognize the type of magic. The girl asked the teacher to interpret the spell she showed Kim. Woojin wondered what he should do. The young lady reported that at the moment several dorm debutantes were in the process of analyzing it, but unsuccessfully deciding that the professor might give some clue. Decline replied that it was barrier magic. Hearing the answer, she couldn't have thought to tell her immediately. The professor assured her that there was no need for hints here. The teacher added that it was a barrier magic type char, assuming that someone wanted to catch it. He finished the lecture and he received a notification of successful completion of the quest. After the students went to the dining hall to have lunch, they discussed the last lecture. The student, with the help of an unknown spell, wanted to make it look like the professor's skill at interpreting spells was a lie. The girl realized that he was confused but made her look stupid without any manners. She almost died of shame. The student was pleased that she still managed to make the professor nervous, and he said it was barrier magic. Barrier magic was quite complex in its structure. Most spells of this type required parameters, but it was difficult to determine the type of magic without parameters. The girl had just brought with her an unidentified spell she had scrawled on the dormitory door last night. In the beginning, it was rather rambling, but its essence was to increase the search skills of newcomers. Ephraim continued to ponder the topic of who this professor really was, but another student ran up to her. The girl decided to talk to her about the spell on the dormitory door yesterday, because after it was discovered that it was really barrier magic, everything was finally resolved. Ephraim was surprised that this acquaintance pointed out that they didn't have the guts to question that creepy professor, but she turned out to be the epitome of fearlessness. Her interlocutor couldn't believe that that magic was really a barrier. An acquaintance assured me it was a barrier she thought Decline was awesome because there were no parameters. The student thanked Ephraim, said that she would write a statement and add her name. She didn't mind. Ephraim couldn't believe that the professor had figured it out, realizing that she had only improved his reputation by doing so. The girl pulled out a lecture he was giving this semester, the description of which was along the lines of, "Understand your enemy and defeat them all." Ephraim decided that she shouldn't hesitate if she wanted to keep seeing this man's face. She was sure she would bring him out soon. Walking out of the lecture hall, Kim Woojin realized that everything had gone much better than he had anticipated. The developer also realized that everything could turn out very badly, because the student's question was unexpected. Earlier, when he looked at that spell, his comprehension activated on its own. One look at that spell circle with the intertwined lines was enough to use up almost all of his mana. Even so, even if he had twice as much mana, he still couldn't understand how this spell worked. Kim Woojin breathed out a sigh of relief because nothing bad had happened when someone suddenly approached him. Noticing the girl in front of him, the developer imperceptibly began to worry because he did not know who she was. Examining the white hair and blonde eyes, he remembered that he had seen her endlessly many times on his monitor screen. As Julia von de Frieden came closer, she asked how he was doing. Kim Woojin knew she was Decline's bride and destined to achieve the highest knighthood. He had not expected to see her here. Decline replied to her that he was doing fine and saw her intimidating look on his face. Julia asked that he was doing well, even though he had broken the promise they had made to each other a week ago. Kim Woojin didn't understand what promise he was talking about. The developer decided that it would be better to avoid this conversation. He replied to the interlocutor that he did not recall and decided to leave her. Julia assumed he was deliberately trying to escape, just like last time. Kim Woojin made sure her demeanor said she had no intention of letting him pass. Decline replied that he had forgotten about the promise because of the recent fever, asking her to remind him what it was. Suddenly it came to 5 that Julia had asked him to promise her that if he was honest and recognized the lies and deceit he had allowed up to this point, even if the world started to fall apart, that he would always be with her. The girl made sure he didn't justify her trust by letting him just walk away. Decline apologized and moved on. Julia was very angry at his action. Julia's engagement to Declan was arranged for practical reasons. He was a gifted magician and she a gifted knight. The union of these two was to benefit their families as well as politics. The Euclines and the Friedens were two noble families, and no one objected to this marriage, which was to the advantage of both families. Julia decided it was okay because she was doing it for the good of her family, even though she didn't love him. However, both families soon realized that Declane's talent was just a fiction, suggesting that he refused to admit it. But calling himself a genius at interpreting spells, he fooled the world. Eventually, he even managed to become a professor. After one incident, he stopped making any progress at all, but the Euclines and the Friedens still tried to keep silent. Julia thought it was because both families didn't want to be the subject of gossip. The girl was sure they didn't want their flaws to become public. Julia, despite the passage of time, could not come to terms with it. She was not against a marriage of convenience, but did not accept this lie because that was her chivalrous principles. Decline was fine with her desire and agreed to her proposal at first, which she was glad of. After a while, he just took and spit on the promise he made, and Julia couldn't forgive him for it. Imperial University is the best university in this game, and the magic department was the strongest among all the existing ones. The Korean equivalent of the Magic Department was Seoul University Medical School, and the Magic Tower was Seoul National University Hospital. Kim Woo-jin noticed that the place looked beautiful. He saw a large campus. Afterward, he visited the garden, which was constantly cared for and reminded him of an American college campus. Kim Woo-jin and his co-workers worked day and night to create this atmosphere. The developer realized that it would be much better if he could enjoy this campus on behalf of another person. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him, and trying to turn around, he bumped into a guy carrying a box. The young man apologized for his act and explained that he was in a hurry to see his professor. Kim Woo-jin thought it was some kind of ambush, but it was a kid he assumed was named Zoro. The guy responded negatively, reported that his name was Alan the professor, reported that he just got him mixed up. After entering the office, the man asked why he was rushing to him. Alan replied that he had delivered him a list of sponsors for this year's new magicians. The Magic Tower was like some kind of research center from the real world, and to develop magic required money. The professors of the Magic Tower sponsored new mages they deemed worthy. Kim Woo-jin looked at the documents and saw that one name was shining with a golden color. Assuming that it was the attribute of a tycoon, a born tycoon, and an excellent financier with unrivaled intuition for profitable deals. The attribute of acute vision was the ability to visually perceive by intuition, by engaging mana points intended to be used in conjunction with other traits. Kim Woo-jin suggested that it was all about the combination of a tycoon and keen eyesight, believing that this person could bring in more profits. Looking through the dossier, he noticed that there were several other similar candidates. One of the names was brighter than the others. She was Ifrin Luna, whom he had seen before. One of the main characters of the game according to the game's storyline, Ifrin lost her father because of Declane. The professor asked why Ifrin Lu doesn't have sponsorship. Alan didn't expect such a question. It seemed to Alan that it was just that Ifrin was feared by everyone. Kim Woo-jin remembered that the mages feared his further actions if he dared to find out that they were sponsoring her. The professor noticed that the girl had enough talent to enter the Magic Tower even without completing her academy studies. However, Ifrin Luna was an enemy of Declane, but to be precise, Declane was her enemy. The developer realized that if he left things as they were, he'd be finished. The system informed him of the fate of the game's villain. Declan could die in a myriad of ways. A sword to the heart, a wand to the head, a glass of poisoned wine. Kim Woo-jin knew that a game character could also be killed by a bomb blast, and no matter what the method, the fact of his death would remain the same. The developer realized that in order to survive, he had to make a different choice. He reviewed several more documents. After Kim Woo-jin made a decision that the original Declan would never have made, the professor betrayed the letter to Alan asking him to send it, and grab a couple of books the title of which he had written to him. The student said goodbye to the professor and went to fulfill his request. He was left to himself. The developer realized that he would need a lot of money to survive with it to avoid a lot of bad game outcomes. Investing in mages was one way to make money, but he realized it still wasn't enough. Kim Woo-jin knew that this world was full of people who hated him, and they would try to get rid of him at any opportunity, which is why he needed to find a solution to survive. The developer realized that he needed to get stronger in this game, or he would be in for a bad outcome, in case of which he didn't know what would happen to him. Continuing to look through the documentation, the guy tried to figure out how he could get stronger quickly. Kim Woo-jin knew that Decline had very mediocre talent, and at this rate, he would not be able to face future threats. If he does not prepare properly, he will not survive the countless impending demises. The only thing that played into his hands was his acquired attributes that he gave him before he got here. The developer realized that contrary to his claims, Decline was not capable of controlling all four elements, but he had the potential to manipulate the elements of earth and fire. The result of the combination of earth, fire, and metal was one of the attributes called Midas Touch, expended the wearer's mana to unlock the target's potential. Thus, Declane's talent allowed him to manipulate metal and allowed him to use levitating blades controlled with chi energy. It sounded cool, but Kim Woo-jin realized that in reality it was simple telekinesis. although it wasn't as common in this world, so he could compensate for his strength deficiencies by manipulating the properties of metal. The developer realized that in order to understand how it worked, he had to first learn the theory, he had to learn how to manipulate objects. After reading the book, he decided to try. The professor started pouring his mana into the book lying in front of him. After a moment, a magical seal formed over him, which formed a whirlwind in the room. Materials and basic telekinesis spells were pouring straight into his head. He was having a hard time of it. Daekline waited a moment before deciding to try his hand at it. He directed magic at the handle and it rose into the air. Kim Woojin had memorized everything about basic telekinesis, and now for him to use it, he didn't need to cast spells. He didn't think he would be able to see with his own eyes what, until now, he had only seen in the character settings. After a while, he became convinced that a basic level of telekinesis would not be enough. He could not achieve the right level of strength even with advanced telekinesis. The developer wondered what to do in such a case. He happened to notice a book that was illuminated. He decided to try to cover his entire body with magic circles. Kim knew that in this world the power of a magic circle depends on its size, and if he knows his body with the help of understanding, he will be able to draw magic circles on the surface of the body, on the brain, heart, and even on the inner core. The man realized that his body might be overloaded or he might experience a side effect from it. Iron Man's skill was an innate physical ability, an attribute his body might have the highest potential, but because of that, he was able to deal with any effects. Kim Woojin was sure that he was the only one capable of such a thing in this world, now that he had 800 mana points, and that should be enough for a small test. The professor began to test his power, and his office became flooded with magical power again. Suddenly, in the same second he was overcome with unbearable pain, he tried his best to hold on. The pain was incomparable, and he felt as if every bone in his body had been broken and every muscle torn. However, in spite of this terrible pain, he did not flinch and did not emit a single groan, because the elegance of a nobleman demanded it. After a while, there was no trace of magic use in the room, but Kim Woojin found it hard to stand. The developer felt extremely depleted. He screwed up because he didn't have enough mana. Even so, he still managed to learn a useful lesson from this, and now he had a magic circle on his shoulder, assuming that at this rate it would take him 2 weeks to cover his entire body with magic circles. A month had passed since Daeclane's lecture, and the first school day of the new month had arrived in the university's magical tower, and the students had noticed that the classes were different from what the upperclassmen had told them. Students couldn't think he would make them study using some signage they didn't realize they had to do. Ephraim Moon was indignant, so about as much as she expected from an irresponsible person. The girl made sure the professor left them alone in a place like this for self-development. Suddenly, a passing student hit Ephraim with her shoulder, then she didn't realize why she did it. Ephraim Luna realized that this girl was Sylvia von Josephine Illides. Sylvia didn't realize what she wanted her to do because she had just accidentally hit her shoulder. Eifrin was surprised that this girl didn't recognize her, but she didn't bother explaining herself to her. After a while, the student tried to figure out what it was because she realized that Sylvia was from the Illids family. 10 years ago, being in fear of her father and potential the Illids family, used their army to surround Luna Manor and intimidate them. Ephraim didn't understand how Sylvia could not remember her after such an event. Her created sand castle collapsed. The girl felt as if her mune was being sucked in by something unknown. Turning around, she saw beside her Sylvia, who by engaging her powers had accidentally engaged Eifrin's mana. Eifrin asked her what she was doing since she had taken her mana she had collected, but Sylvia ignored her questions. The student didn't understand what was wrong with Sylvia and why she was taking her time to answer her. The girl asked her acquaintance why she pretended not to know her, but Sylvia continued to ignore her. Eifrin stated that she definitely recognized her after intimidating her family and forcing her to give up magic, suggesting that Sylvia thought that Eifrin intended to steal her fame. Sylvia had no idea who she was. Ephraim was surprised that she condescended to talk to her. The girl said she didn't know her, but Eifrin's father did, and she was surprised to hear it. Sylvia called Ephraim Luna's father a pushy nobleman she heard that he had passed away. Eifrin was furious at the words she heard. She decided to take revenge on her for insulting her father. The other students noticed the tremendous magical energy that flared up between these girls. Eifrin used her skills to attack Sylvia von Josephine Illides. The girl asked to repeat what she had just said. Sylvia hadn't expected such aggression. Eifrin decided to put all her accumulated anger on this girl who hurt her feelings. Sylvia von Josephine Illides managed to create a barrier in front of her in time to defend herself. There was a massive explosion that made the whole neighborhood shake, and the rest of the students were shocked by it. A powerful shockwave began to move everything out of place. Students began to worry about their female classmates. Eifrin managed to break through the defense and grabbed Sylvia by the hair. The latter asked her to put it down. Eifrin asked how dare she insult her father. The student threatened her opponent with retaliation, but suddenly a strange event interrupted their conversation. The people around them saw an incomprehensible glow that formed near them. Some of them started to run away. Ephraim Luna assumed that this void appeared where her mana collided with Sylvina's, and it sucked in everything around it. It seemed to the students that this void was about to explode, but Ephraim realized that if it did, the metal fragments would scatter like bullets. The resulting hole of emptiness began to explode all objects near it. Suddenly, Ifrin noticed that it had gotten a little too quiet, assuming that the hole had stopped. When she looked back, she saw that Professor Deklinom von Grahan-Uklein had come to their aid, stopping the shards. Ifrin didn't understand where it came from, or why the exploded fragments were frozen in place. When Deklein used telekinesis, the students' cheers of admiration were all around. The students had only recently begun their studies and couldn't resist the beauty of this magic. Some of them realized that it was amplification magic, whose dazzling aspect could not be unrecognized. The professor asked for attention and announced that today's class was over. The teacher said that everyone is free except the two who made all the fuss. Ifrin Luna realized that she was done for, suggesting that she might be kicked out of the university for this act. After a while, they came to the interrogation room. The man was surprised that the head professor, Deklein, was already there. Relly reported that Deklein, along with the chairman, are role models for all magicians. Chairwoman Adeline Sigilian said hello to Professors Rathlin and Relly, apologizing for such an urgent call. Professor Relly asked whose handiwork it was and who dared to attack the lady of the Illid's family, and was told that it was done by some commoner who was not trained at the academy. Relly had heard that Professor Deklein had been able to deal with the situation, thus preventing the terrible consequences. Reutlin had also heard about it. Kim Woojin noticed the blatant flattery, realizing that all these professors were well acquainted with the high society, and he was more than sure that the results of this meeting had already been decided. Everyone knew that Sylvia was the daughter of the powerful Illad family, and Ifrin was a fallen noblewoman who had actually become a commoner. The developer realized which side the professors would take. The man decided that he had to change the course of this game process in which he found himself, because a little earlier he noticed a strange thing. Professor Deklein noticed a purple energy emanating from Ifrin that no one but him could see. Due to his keen eyesight, only Deklein could see it. This energy signified the manifestation of the villain's destiny, and if he failed to change the results, he would be one step closer to his demise. The assembled began a disciplinary meeting with Ifrin and Sylvia, who were debutante mages. Professor Relly didn't understand how Ifrin dared to make a scuffle in these walls, because if it wasn't for Professor Deklein, someone could have gotten hurt. Teachers asked why the student decided to pick a fight in the first place. Ifrin said she couldn't say. Ifrin knew Deklein was watching her, and that was why she couldn't give a reason. The girl remembered that Sylvia had dared to insult her father and had done it on purpose. Ifrin couldn't say that in the presence of her enemy, assuming she was being kicked out. Rel didn't realize that the trick she'd pulled had assumed that Ifrin had decided to vent her inner complexes on Sylvia. The professor stated that she should have remembered the difference in her and Sylvia's situation. He asked how dare she forget it. After that, the gathering decided to listen to what Sylvia the student had to say to them, saying that she had accidentally destroyed Ifrin's work during class, and that was the reason for their altercation. The professors concluded that Sylvia didn't do it on purpose, but Ifrin made such a fuss anyway. Some of the committee thought that Ifrin had anger control issues. Relly said that they should expel this student because they could not turn a blind eye to such behavior. Listening to all these insults at the usual disciplinary meeting, all the swearing was only towards Ifrin. She was unable to say anything in her defense. The girl realized that she had no one to protect her, and she kept getting colder and colder. Ifrin thought that Deklein was the only one to blame for all of this. Chairman Adeline Sigelian seemed to think that their opinions with the professors were in agreement. The chair decided to first propose to hear from Professor Deklein, as he was directly involved in this incident. Deklein asked his question as the head professor of this tower, and also as a member of the disciplinary committee. Ifrin realized it was over. The man asked if she really thought the accident was not her fault. Suddenly, everyone realized that this question had been asked to Sylvia von Josephine Illeds, the one who had not expected it the most. Deklein repeated his question again. Ifrin Luna was shocked that Sylvia had also been asked to explain. The people around him didn't understand what Deklein was trying to accomplish by doing that. Deklein replied that it was quite obvious to him that Sylvia could have prevented the incident, but did not do so, suggesting that her abilities may have been exaggerated. The professor also suggested that Sylvia simply couldn't do anything about it, and apologized for not stopping Ifrin, explaining that she wanted her to earn more punishment. Ifrin didn't understand why Deklein was questioning Sylvia and not her. She knew she was to blame for what had happened. Relly said it was the attacker's fault, not the defenders, but Deklein replied that since the context was important, he was the guilty party because he had started the activity, and maybe Relly just wanted him to plead guilty. The professor assured her that he didn't think so, explaining that he thought his question was dubious. Ifrin heard Deklein refute Relly's position by siding with Sylvia. The girl assumed that Professor Deklein was trying to protect her. The chairman said enough arguments. Adelina Sigelian pointed out that it is inherent for children to quarrel while growing up, assuring that they have just become debutantes, and therefore, instead of looking for the culprit of the incident, he suggested to close their eyes for the first and last time. The chairman said that they would not take any disciplinary action against them, but Ifrin was ready to be expelled, assuming that the Deklein she knew would not do so. After Relly stated to Declan that he did a great job analyzing the situation, realizing that they did everything for the students. As he left, the professor noticed the look on Ifrin's face, who didn't understand why he did that. The student assumed that since Declan knew her father, did he know that he was the reason he suffered the rest of his life? Until he decided to take his own life. The man had expected such a thing from Ifrin Moon, he stopped to listen to her grievances. The girl wanted to find out if he remembered Luna's family and if he knew that her father had died because of his actions. Ifrin suggested that he might not remember that and might have given up his scraps to protect himself. The student decided that even if Decline did remember her father for her, the act would be even more painful. Suddenly, the professor said she didn't have to ask that question. She was surprised to hear it. The teacher advised Ifrin Luna not to waste her potential on something that was in the past. The girl decided not to ask him anything because she had already found confirmation of her guesses. Ifrin was convinced that Declan knew her and her father. There was no other explanation for his decision to help her in this way, assuming he felt some responsibility and so decided to help. The girl concluded that a little earlier he had helped her out of pity, remembering her dead father. The student was relieved as he had not forgotten her, and such a thing was enough for her. After a while, the car was driving down a dirt road through a thick forest. People were discussing something. Giltion von Ludwig Ilatz informed his daughter that she no longer had to worry about Ifrin. Father reported that Ifrin Luna undoubtedly has talent, but she missed her chance. He and she had first met 10 years ago during the academy entrance exam. The mage reported that these two girls both possessed archmage-level talent, such as this was rare. The man marveled that they were both from their lands, received as a gift from a superior. The pinnacle of the magical world creatures with which even the emperors themselves could not compare, those who managed to reach such a level were called archmages. Their names were inscribed in the history of this continent. However, according to the established rules in one era, there can be only 3 archmages. Their type or specialty had no importance among mages, and this rule remained unchanged. The elder said that if you don't count Demerkin's seat, there were 2 vacant seats, but one of them was likely to go to Adelina, the chairman of the Magic Tower. Sylvia, heiress of the Illitz family, and Ifrin, heiress of a side branch of their family, had to compete for the remaining seat. Gilteon von Ludwig Ilatz did not explain anything to his daughter, but she understood everything without words. Earlier, he told Keegan Luna to forget about his daughter, Ifrin entering the academy. Sylvia learned that day that the Illides family had trampled the Luna family just for the Archmage's seat. The girl realized that this was done to secure her place as Archmage. She herself wished it. Thinking about it, she didn't notice their car almost approaching their family estate. Sylvia assumed that Ifrin was afraid she would steal all her fame from her, and that's why she did that. The girl concluded that she was just unlucky since Decline had settled their dispute in a draw. Her father assured her that his daughter didn't have to worry about Ifrin, but she should watch out for Declan. Giltion von Ludwig Ilatz assured that this professor is not so simple, saying that as a child he was called a prodigy. All they know about him is the fact that he appeared literally out of nowhere. Sylvia realized this herself, deciding to heed her father's advice and beware of Professor Decline. Remembering what had happened, the girl realized that the professor had seen right through her trap. Sylvia had no doubt that at that moment she had made Ifrin's mana disappear. She had set a trap that would explode upon contact with Ifrin's mana. The harder her punch was, the more trouble she would get in, but Decline immediately figured out Sylvia's plan despite her checking for any signs of magical surveillance in the room itself. Despite this, the professor still forced them to compromise instead of blaming Sylvia for everything. The girl thought Decline knew everything and so asked him to play along, and it was a threat she couldn't help but take. At first, Sylvia thought she was just an ordinary, arrogant professor whose talents were just above average, but now she didn't realize who he was. Several days passed. The luxurious car stood outside the Declan estate waiting for the Lord. Driver Roy asked the gentleman if he was ready to leave. Decline replied that he would be down shortly. Kim Woo-jin made sure that it was not in vain that he decided to support Ifrin in this conflict, because thanks to this, he was able to avoid the variable death of the game character, and in addition, he received the currency of the game store. The developer didn't think that the student who asked that question would be Ifrin, even though she was extremely hostile to him that time. The man suggested that Sylvia might hold a grudge against him because of what had happened, but he had no other choice. Declan said he would prefer to avoid social events, but he couldn't pass up the opportunity to earn extra currency at the store. The man knew that he needed at least 5 currencies to gain access to the store, which is why he needed to keep a close eye on the characters present at the event he was traveling to. After he arrived at the appointed place, the servants greeted Professor Decline with bows. Looking around, he noticed that everyone present looked like high-ranking aristocrats, and he also saw quite a few familiar faces. This was especially true of Ehelm, whom Kim Woo-jin modeled personally and spent a fair amount of time creating this playable character. The developer made sure he didn't come here for nothing. Declaim noticed one of the people present. The man was glad that Professor Declan himself had come to them to tell them that his son was attending his lectures. The people around them hearing their conversation were surprised that the professor deigned to attend their event. Suddenly, the Tolka surrounded Declaim because she wanted to meet him. Kim Woo-jin saw their reaction and realized he was too excited. Mrs. Ganesha had read of his accomplishments in a continental magazine. This came as a surprise to Declan. The man offered the professor to have dinner with his family, but the professor abruptly left him. Kim Woo-jin heard someone say Ganesha's name. Knowing someone who had an important role to play in the upcoming events could play into his hands. Declan had no way of finding this game character in the crowd, but he knew for sure that her name sounded somewhere in this place. The man realized that he should take this chance to get to know her. The adventurer Ganesha was the 5th strongest playable character at the time the story began. She stood on the 2nd floor and glared at the professor, who fidgeted upon hearing her name. Looking up, she noticed that she was standing on the 2nd floor. A woman with red hair and 2 ponytails noticed him. Kim Woo-jin decided to approach her as soon as possible. Suddenly, someone else approached him. The magician noticed Professor Declan and intended to talk to him, but he didn't have time. Wilhelm von Harrian Revend was an imperial elite mage monarch, had the 4th strongest rank. The man was glad that he was remembered by the head professor Decline himself, stating that they had not seen each other for a long time. He asked to know how his research was going, and he also heard some rumors that he wanted to share. Decline asked what he meant. Wilhelm had heard that in the last 3 years there had been no progress in his research, and people were beginning to doubt his abilities. The man had once been a colleague of Declane's at the university, and they had once been close, but after Declane was promoted to head professor, Wilhelm held a grudge against him. This provocation might have had some effect on the original Declane, but to Kim Woo-jin it looked meaningless. Though he couldn't say he was wrong, because such rumors did exist. Decline noticed that Ganesha was missing. Wilhelm said that if he kept on being all-powerful, no one would love him. Kim Woo-jin couldn't believe that he had lost Ganesha because of his conversation with Wilhelm. The professor suggested that Wilhelm get behind him with his talk, calling him an inferior fool. Wilhelm was outraged to hear the insulting words directed at him. Declan rushed to find Ganesha. He had to do so before she left the event. Some people noticed that Professor Decline had gone missing, so they started looking for him. Even though he had managed to get rid of Wilhelm around, someone still wanted to talk to him. Kim Woo-jin was the reason why he didn't like social events. Suddenly, Ganesha herself approached him. He didn't expect her to find him in this place by herself. The girl assumed that he was deliberately looking for her. She also intended to talk to him. The developer couldn't have thought he'd find Ganesha trying to escape the leeches, but more importantly, the girl was already familiar with Decline. Decline explained that he was a little lost. Ganesha knew what he was looking for because he had something to tell her. The girl apologized for the past mission, assuring him that she had already returned the deposit and the penalty, and offered to turn a blind eye for the first and last time. Kim Woo-jin assumed that they had some kind of business relationship. Ganesha was sorry she never got to bring him a child with a talent for magic, but that was because she just didn't want to do it. The girl explained that she was just too attached to the child, and in the end, she just couldn't give him away. The developer realized what she meant because, in the end, Decline just planned to do it all over again and make up for his shortcomings with the help of a talented child. Ganesha decided to ask him one question the professor was willing to listen to her and answer. I asked him how long he was going to continue this way of life, and the man thought for a moment. Kim Woo-jin, before he took over Decline's body, happily accepted praise from those who had no use for it. Decline destroyed all his connections and injured many for his own glory to the detriment of others. Now the professor answered Ganesha that he would live in a very different way, and the latter was surprised at this answer. The girl stated that she had not expected such an answer and was ready for him to try to destroy her. Gensha was taken on a secret mission from which she eventually escaped, but Decline assured her that such concern was unnecessary. Kim Woo-jin couldn't believe that a game character could actually attack Ganesha, who possessed top-class fighting abilities, realizing that it was pure stupidity. The developer wasn't sure about the original Declan, but Ganesha was said to be the one who could destroy with a single sweep of her hair. Ganesha possessed the attributes of an invulnerable body and mastery of all martial arts. She was a warrior and adventurer, reaching the peak of physical strength. Kim Woo-jin knew Declane's place and realized that he hadn't had time to send a mercenary to her in time to send Ganesha to the other side of the world. This isn't exactly how the developer envisioned it all, but he still achieved his main goal at this networking event. The man made sure that he had no need to stay here any longer, for it was time for him to return. Ganesha was surprised that he was already leaving. The girl decided to make sure their relationship was okay, or should she expect any attempts on her life. Decline reported that the assassination attempt is utter tastelessness. Ganesha was surprised at this answer. Kim Woo-jin realized that he could use the power of the Uklines to nail her with the help of the Adventurers Guild, but by doing so, he could create more variables that could bring his demise closer. The system informed the player that he had managed to avoid the variable perdition he was added to the in-game store currency. The developer realized what before it had said to overcome and now avoided deciding, that the conversation with Ganesha was also one of the variables of his demise. The player made sure that he cannot relax for a second because the plot can dramatically change the course of events. Meanwhile, Julia's relative Riley approached the girl and tried to find out how much longer she was going to sit there. Julia didn't want to come here at all, but Riley told her to stop pouting and come over to her. The girl replied that she didn't want that Riley asked how she was doing with that man. Riley was referring to Professor Declan, and she'd heard some rumors that made her feel bad about Julia. Remembering her last conversation with the professor, Julia replied that it was bad enough on its own. Riley asked her not to speak so loudly. Julia noticed that Declan was next to them and could hear their conversation. The man did not interfere with their conversation, deciding to simply remove himself from the event. The people around him assumed that the professor was already leaving, which seemed strange to them because he loved social events. Declan left for the exit without even looking in the direction of his fiancée. The people around him assumed they were in a quarrel. Since Declan left the social event earlier than usual, people assumed that it was because of his and Julia's rift. Kim Woojin was unaware of this and simply left the place for his own personal reasons. After his attendance at a social event called the Flower of the New Year, a week passed. In addition to memorizing and practicing basic telekinesis every day, Kim Woojin felt that he lacked stamina and began to exercise physically. The reason for this was that he was almost killed recently due to his poor stamina. A couple of days ago, if he had been an ordinary mage, he would have surely died. He managed to survive only thanks to the attribute of the Iron Man. After meeting Ganesha, he wanted to get even more power and tried to strengthen his manipulation with metal. The developer added fire control to telekinesis, and during this enhancement, tried to transfer spell essence into his telekinesis. This method could allow for less time to learn magic, but realized that this enhancement had a price. That's why physical training became as important as magical training from that moment on. He established a special morning routine for himself. After finishing his morning workout, he realized it was time to go to work. Then Declan got a message from the Magic Tower that he didn't expect. The sender turned out to be the qualification board for professors of the Magic Tower. Chief Professor Declan was informed of a formal hearing regarding the results of his current research that was to take place in 6 months. The board wanted him to prepare all relevant documents for them. Kim Woojin realized that since they had decided to hold a formal hearing, it meant that Declan's research had stalled long before he had taken over his body. He was in an extremely unfortunate situation. The developer knew that in the game itself, Declan had always been a professor, and if for the quest, he was literally required to remain a professor, then losing the position could be a point of no return. So Kim Woojin hoped that he would be able to find something in Declan's lab where he was headed. Upon entering the lab, the player saw an absolute mess that reduced his chances of success. The developer had the feeling that no one had been in this room for a long time, and he doubted that the lab would be in such a terrible state if Declan had even looked in on it occasionally. The man noticed a pile of trash that looked particularly unnatural in this place, assuming there was something in it. Declan had no idea who was behind it, but he had a feeling someone had done it on purpose so he wouldn't even get close to her. The player was glad that the professor was able to use telekinesis using magic. He found in this pile of garbage a diary. After reading a few pages, he realized that someone had encrypted all the results of his research so that no one could steal them. He realized that it was all useless against him. He used the attribute of understanding. A blinding golden light flooded the laboratory. The player made sure that this research was simply incredible. And thanks to the combination of Magnate and Ostrogo vision, he realized that it was the most real diamond. The developer made sure that the man never finished his research. Some pages were torn out and there were omissions, so he noticed the wrong theoretical part. Despite all the flaws, the Tycoon attribute still found this study brilliant. Suddenly, the man saw a picture of a girl. He immediately realized it was Ifrin Luna. Kim Woojin realized that Ifrin's father was trying to hide this work while continuing to work for Declan as a researcher. The mages of the Luna family hated Declan, for it was because of him that Ifrin had to experience all the hardships of life. The developer has decided to finish Keegan's research with the attribute of understanding, and if he really succeeds in doing so, he will put Ifrin's father's name into it. After a while in a campus coffee shop called Light and Coffee, the students gathered there were discussing important business. The girl said that they should all stick together because there were only 30 commoners in the class, and if they didn't work together one day, they would regret it. Ifrin did not expect such a question from her, but she did not understand what it had to do with her being a noblewoman. Ifrin was convinced that it was time for her to forget about her past life, since she had no home or land anyway. The girl asked if Ifrin understood that she belonged among them. Because she was a member of the commoners, she realized that they considered her one of their own. The guy stated that if they wanted to start any kind of club, they needed the professor's permission. He didn't think any of them would like the idea of them getting together. The girl made sure it was indeed a problem. She asked, "What about Professor Reelan?" The student replied that he just loves to suck up to various nobles. After she asked, "What about Professor Carmel?" She was told that this man, as soon as he sees someone from the commoners, immediately turns away. Guy summarized that Professor Decline wouldn't sign their authorization either. Ifrin didn't realize if the students were even going to eat this delicious cake. She wanted to taste it as soon as possible. Suddenly, the girl suggested that Ifrin ask Professor Decline to do it, and she was surprised at her suggestion. Her co-workers assumed she could do it for them, but Ifrin was terrified of it because she couldn't stand Declan. The lad assured that Declan was a very fair professor and he despised nobles and commoners alike. The student pointed out that because of this, Ifrin had gotten away with it, and it meant that he liked her. But Ifrin assured that it was nothing of the sort, surprised that they thought he was so kind. The girl didn't understand why the conversation had turned in that particular direction. She didn't want to mess with Declan. Ifrin ran out of the coffee shop saying she just couldn't do it. Her classmate asked her not to say that and suggested she think about it, but Ifrin assured her that if she tried to do it, it would only make things worse. Suddenly, the girl noticed the professor next to her. Ifrin didn't notice Declan right away. Declan asked the student to step back. She didn't realize he was going to show up next to her. Julia wished her classmate good luck in signing the permission slip to form a mug. Ifrin didn't realize when she escaped. Ifrin turned to the professor, who at first didn't understand what she wanted from him, but only noticed a document. The girl wanted to start a club explaining that she needed a signature from one of the professors to do so. Ifrin assured him she wouldn't have bothered him, but the other teachers didn't approve of the Commoners Club for anything. She didn't want to mess with Declan, but she knew the guys were right. The students were sure that the other professors wouldn't listen to them. Ifrin realized that they wouldn't lose anything if they just tried. Unexpectedly, the professor took the document and signed it, asking him to send all the details regarding their club to his office later. Ifrin didn't expect him to agree to give them permission. She thanked him, but continued to stare at him in surprise, making sure that the professor had indeed signed. She couldn't understand why he was being so lenient. The girl was surprised that Declan honored her request. Pleased that Julia ran up to her. The classmate was very pleased that she was able to do it, but Ifrin didn't understand why he helped her, remembering that a similar thing had happened at the disciplinary meeting. A few days later, the professor announced that this class would be devoted to understanding the pure elements that were the basis of all magic. But until now, there were many mages who did not see the difference between the categories of magic and the pure elements. Ifrin listened to Declan's lecture and assumed he was helping her out of guilt or sympathy. The girl realized that he had driven her father to his demise, and so she found it hard to believe in the sincerity of his action. The student suggested that if the professor truly realized his wrongdoing, he should confess to his actions. Julia asked if Ifrin was all right. She thought she felt bad, but it only distracted her from her thoughts. The girl advised Ifrin not to worry because it seemed to her that they only knew how to talk. But Ifrin didn't understand what she was telling her. Ifrin noticed the disgruntled looks of the other female applicants who had been discussing commoners the entire lecture. After that incident, Ifrin became an enemy to all nobles, even though she herself was a noblewoman. Ifrin assured Julia that everything was fine because those girls always acted like that. They decided to focus on the lecture. The professor spoke of the magic circles they had used up to this point, each of their strokes carrying a certain meaning. Delane's lectures seemed different to Ifrin. He informed that the color of this ignition spell could be changed with just 2 strokes, because they were the ones responsible for the color of the flame. The spell he and the students were studying was called Flowing Flame. He showed them the book. Ifrin's feelings were not misguided. Originally, Declan had only given lectures to show off his position as professor, but the lectures Kim Woojin gave were a perfect demonstration of the use of magic. Using his creativity, the developer helped the students to understand everything that was going on. All the debutantes who attended his lectures were shocked by such a spectacle, and the same happened to Sylvia. Sylvia had long since forgotten the joy of learning from her brilliant talent. The professor showed them a magic circle for summoning water. The students continued to marvel. Declan stated that if they connect it to the fire magic circle, the following will happen. The teacher demonstrated their words to them. By practicing, the students noticed that the flames began to flow like water. Sylvia thought this was unbelievable and watched with interest. The girl didn't realize that Professor Declan's lecture was so full of theory. Most magicians who were called geniuses used intuition to apply spells, and theory was for them something like a form. And if all magicians preferred theory, all the magic of this world would look like a copycat. Such thoughts were logical because if you focus too much on theory, the magician simply had no time to study magic itself. Trying to understand all of it only through the prism of theory was extremely inefficient, and thus the magician did not have enough time to train. Such was the paradox of magic. Declan realized that to become an elite mage had to possess good intuition, but the elite themselves were unable to describe the essence of intuition. For a man whose genius was being questioned in public at the moment, to give a lecture entirely centered on theory seemed impossible to Sylvia. Students were convinced after the lecture that this was different from how they had been described the lecture with Declan before. It was the first time Ifrin had ever been so focused on a lecture that she was even a little tired upon arriving at the Magic Tower dormitory. Noticing the writing on the door of her room that she needed to clean up, she was surprised that anyone was lazy enough to write that. After that incident with Sylvia, things got much worse. She noticed a letter under her door. Ifrin realized that it was a sponsorship certificate, but she thought it was a prank, since it didn't make any sense and no one would sponsor a student who was hated by the Elad and Declan family. The student decided that it was only to her advantage. She intended to report this false certificate and receive an award. Ifrin went to the office of the magical administration, but there she was told that this certificate was real. The secretary explained to her that this document had a genuine stamp on it. The student could not believe it. Ifrin was very happy that this sponsorship certificate was real. She thought it was a pleasant dream. After that, she made sure that no one saw her and hurriedly left the office of the magical administration. The girl pondered what would happen if people realized she had 100,000 ELNE. She decided to pack her suitcases for an emergency, deciding she shouldn't have gone to the administration office. Ifrin remembered the strange look on the employee's face, assuming she was targeting her money. The student decided to use extreme caution but accidentally hit her head on the table she was sitting under. The girl made sure that it was not a dream and she really became the owner of a large sum of money. Crying with happiness, she assumed that someone had noticed her talent. Realizing that there was still kindness left in the world, Ifrin decided to pull herself together, shifting her focus of attention. She began to tidy up her room. Meanwhile, in Uklein-Hadakain, the provincial capital of the estate, heated discussions began. A servant informed the mistress that Declan was on his way to an auction called Treasure Island. The girl stated that last year he spent as much as 10 million ELNE. She was curious to know what he was planning to throw away this time. She decided that if her brother made trouble again, she would not forgive him. Meanwhile, Declan's car was in the town of Luthen, near the building where the Treasure Island auction was being held. Kim Woojin was pleased that he finally had the opportunity to buy the item he had been looking for so long. When he first used telekinesis as his primary magic, he realized that he lacked some metal to compensate for his lack of talent. Now the developer was using an item made of wood steel, but it was a temporary solution. It looked and weighed the same as regular wood, but was actually a high-quality metal stronger than steel. The player knew that this auction would feature the item he needed and entered the VIP waiting room. Then he noticed that there already sat Julia von de Frieden, who had not revived to see here. Familiar glances crossed the girl's eyes as she assumed he was fine, but Declan decided not to answer her. Julia had heard that Declan had sent 2 young mages to meet with the disciplinary committee this time. The man assured that this was no longer news. He asked what she was driving at, assuming that she was going to accuse him too. The girl explained that he was talking about debutantes who had only recently entered university, and she thought he planned to destroy their dreams by driving them into despair, assuring them that one day he would have to answer for his sins. Julia advised him not to make the same mistakes as before, saying that it was the last advice she would give him, and Declan reacted calmly to her words. Kim Woojin assumed that these were her parting words for him, and she intended to cut off their connection. The developer just such an outcome and achieved because no matter how beautiful and no matter, was he did not want to marry because in real life has never been married. The man knew there were too many variable demises associated with Julia, including her own. And if he screwed up, it was possible he'd die right on their wedding day. Declan stated that the Julia he knew was not the same person who attended the auctions. He was curious as to what she was doing here. The man assumed that she had come all this way just to tell him this advice. The girl was surprised by his words. Julia said that he thought too highly of himself, assuring him that she would never have looked for him, and that she had come here because she was looking for something. The girl actually came to see him. She was shocked that he immediately realized her intentions, but decided not to admit it. Declan thought it was cute because it was the first time he'd seen her like that. Julia was sure he'd misunderstood. Suddenly, the developer thought about the feeling he had just experienced only a second ago. He was thinking about how dangerous it was to be around her. Kim Woojin assumed that he was influenced by Declan's emotions. He tried to make sure his personality didn't affect him. Kim Woojin couldn't believe what had happened because his heart had never reacted to seeing Julia before. After the auction was introduced, all preparations were completed and the first lot was brought out for display. The first lot was an oriental vase. Those present were able to appreciate its elegant curves. This vase was created by an artisan from the Far East. Declan noticed that this oriental vase radiated magical energy. He thought it was strange. The player realized that it was the same light he had seen from Father Ifrin's work. Assuming it was an attribute of the magnate, the light grew stronger and stronger. The auctioneer reported that number 1038 had bid 750,000 Eln coins. Declan outbid all bidders by paying 2.5 million ELNE for this oriental vase. Kim Woojin noticed that no matter what price they quoted, the light of the vase was still as bright, which meant that it had a much higher value. He decided to set aside the necessary amount and invest the rest. Declan's current balance sheet was 205 million ELNE. The Ruffarina ring was sold to him for 3 million. The Lucho scissors he bought for 2 million ELNE, and the ancient runic necklace he bought for 4 million. Attendees noticed that the man was buying up all the lots. Julia suggested that Declan was so attention-starved that he decided to stand out here. The girl was convinced that they are with him absolutely not similar. She could not believe that he was willing to spend so much money for the sake of pleasing his ego. Julia also did not understand why Declan does not realize the beauty of modesty. Julia decided to just stop paying attention to him, realizing she was obligated to acquire a winter fire. The auctioneer announced the final item in this auction. He assured that the ore from which this item was made was used to create countless of the finest swords in the history of the Empire. The man added that it was the magic of nature itself, he called it, the winter fire they took off the covering cloth. The Snowfire Stone that Julia and Declan wanted to buy showed up in front of everyone. Snowfire Stone was one of the 10 rarest metals of this world, usually used to create swords or other weapons. True to its name, this rare and paradoxical item simultaneously contained the energies of heat and cold. The only thing better suited for creating swords than this metal were legendary items like Dragon Bone. Kim Woo-jin realized that this stone was the highest quality item he could get, and Julia intended to get it too. The bid for this lot quickly passed 25 million after the auctioneer reported that number 1089 bid 30 million elni. Julia was already happy that no one could outbid her, but suddenly the auctioneer announced that the next bid was 31 million elne. The girl realized that Declan had made that bet. She thought he'd done it on purpose. Julia just couldn't ignore his actions, nor could she understand why he was doing it. Declan was as calm as ever, not noticing that the girl had lost her temper when she heard that her bid had been outbid. One of the men sitting nearby noticed that Declan was persistently trying to buy a snowfire stone, assuming he wanted to give it to his fiancée. The man stated that if it was true, he should let her buy it herself. Declan didn't know what he was talking about. Kim Woo-jin realized that all this time he had been competing with Julia, who also wanted to take the stone for herself. The developer assumed that she was really interested in the snowfire stone and also realized that if he bought it back, she might hold a grudge against him, but he needed it too. This stone appeared at auction for the first time in 3 years and no one knew when it would be here again. Julia and Declan realized it was risky and decided to go to any lengths to get their hands on the snowfire stone. After a while, it was announced that the final bid was in the amount of 42 million elni. The owner of the magic metal became Decline von Grahan Ukline. The rest of the audience was amazed at the spectacle, for Professor Decline had managed to get his hands on the stone, and it was the busiest auction they had ever seen. It seemed to some of the men that Mrs. Frieden had gone a little overboard in being sure that Decline wanted to give her a gift. Julia realized that the events of the past year were repeating themselves again. She never wanted that. A year earlier, Declan had said that if she wanted all the items she had purchased, could be hers. It was the day of their engagement, and it turned out to be the worst day of her life. It seemed to Julia that he was trying to force her to marry him and recognize his greatness. In the midst of all that luxury, the girl felt only humiliation coming from Declan. The girl was sure he knew exactly what she wanted from him. So Julia just left the room, ruining her engagement to Declan. However, this was not the end, but the beginning of their ill-desired relationship. Rumors began to circulate that Julia had been building herself up to be someone else and had fallen for Declan, and they heard that in exchange, she had been promised a position as captain of the Knights in the Order of Ukline. The girl knew at once who was behind all those damaging rumors, but she was sure that Declan wouldn't be able to force her back to him like that. Julia thought she'd never love a man like that, no matter how hard she tried. The girl stood up and noticed Decline approaching her. She didn't realize what he was going to say to her. The man assumed she wanted the snowfire stone too. Julia thought that with such words he continued to mock her. She was angry with him. Suddenly, Decline asked her for forgiveness. The girl was surprised that such a man said he had to go and left her. Julia was confused about what had happened, because it was the first time she had noticed Declan's behavior. After leaving the room, she tried to figure out what exactly he was apologizing for, but the Declan she knew would never apologize. Suddenly, her musings were interrupted by a sweet female voice that called Julia to her side. The girl saw that it was her sister Josephine, who was the eldest daughter of the Frieden family. A short time later, Declan's automobile pulled up to his family estate. Kim Woo-jin believed that Julia wanted to keep the snowfire stone for herself. Assuming she was furious that he had taken it away, he was also surprised that no demise variable appeared. The developer wondered how much Julia hated Declan that she even decided to destroy him. The man noticed that all the servants were upset and asked what was wrong. The lord was told that Mrs. Uriel was here, and he immediately assumed that she would not be pleased with his purchases. His sister said that the money he spent was to pay for the mines, and he promised not to touch it. Kim Woo-jin realized why he had so much money in his account, realizing that he had been too careless, and assured him that he didn't need to worry because he had acquired something that would bring them a lot of profit. Juriel was furious at such a careless act by her brother. She began to charge him for it. The sister stated that her brother treats her like some kind of trash. Kim Woo-jin realized that this mood is not good. Juriel assumed that he thought she should always clean up the mess he left behind. The sister said they were barely making ends meet as it was, and she and her employees were doing everything they could to just keep afloat, and he just went and spent all their money. The girl didn't realize how selfish one had to be to take and spend all the money belonging to the estate. The developer realized that the attribute of the fate of the villain activated by realizing that his business was bad. Noticing the golden light in the red aura, Uriel at the same instant activated the magnate's attribute as well. The man realized that this meant that if he failed to handle the situation, he would die, but if he did, it would bring him a lot of money. Kim Woo-jin knew the solution to the problem and asked Uriel not to worry, but she told him to shut up and tried to make up for his antics by saying that she didn't go to university because of him and didn't even date anyone. Decline replied that she shouldn't have done that. The girl reported that ever since their parents died, all he had done was spend their money. And now he had just spent 150 million elni in one day. Her brother informed her that he would leave her the head of their family. Uriel was surprised to hear this. Sister interjected. Decline repeated that he would give her the place of the head of the Ukline family. Uriel was pleasantly shocked, immediately forgetting the anger she felt towards him. She assumed he was lying, but her brother assured her he wasn't lying to her. The man stated that if she didn't trust him, he could swear an oath. Uriel asked what he meant by a mage's oath, the violation of which would immediately kill a person. Decline assured her that he was serious about doing it. Her sister didn't understand why he did it so suddenly. Uriel suspected that there was something wrong with her brother, because he had never behaved like this before. The man replied that she could not believe him if she did not want to. The girl said that if he took it back, she'd kill him. Then Uriel decided to end their conversation, saying that since he had spent all their money, she should do something about it. The system reported that he had overcome a variable demise. He was added in-game currency. Kim Woo-jin compared it to having passed an entire storm. He saw nothing wrong with giving Juriel the head of the family. The developer suggested that if he kept changing one thing after another, he could escape. Suddenly, Ganesha appeared in the window of his house and made sure he didn't lie to him when he said he was going to change. The man didn't realize what she was forgetting in his manner. She decided to go inside. Decline said it was a surprise visit on her part, and Ganesha apologized, saying she was just passing by and couldn't miss the shocking sight. The professor didn't understand what shocked her because Juriel was better at being the head of the family than he was. Ganesha reported that Uriel von Grahan Ukline does not have a drop of Ukline blood, which came as a surprise to Kim Woo-jin because he didn't remember there being anything like that in the game. The developer didn't understand what she was talking about because the game scenario didn't assume such a thing. Kim Woo-jin that Juriel von Grahan Ukline set up as Decline's half-sister, and he was aware that she was not a sibling. The man suspected that Uriel really didn't have a drop of Ukline blood in her that could refer her to them, but this was the first he'd heard of it. Ganesha asked if he was sure of his decision, assuring him that they had asked to find out if he and Uriel were really blood relatives. Decline replies that no matter how it is, Uriel is still the same Uriel and is trying for the good of the family. The girl didn't stop marveling at him. She hadn't expected to hear something like this from Decline. The professor had assured her he wasn't aware of all this rooting past. Ganesha assured him that he need not worry because with her, his secret would be protected. Leaving, the girl decided at the afterdock to report that the 6 snakeheads had started acting up. 6 snake-headed leaders of negatively known criminal organizations of the continent. They were so famous that for the head of each of them, set a reward of several million. The girl said that their target were the items that had been bought at the last auction, and even if the organizers managed to get the items to Declan, once they arrived at the estate, he would have to be constantly on guard. It seemed to Ganesha that the professor had recently weakened his magical defenses, which was why she had been able to get in. Kim Woo-jin supposed he was better off not knowing the information he had just been told. The man realized that it didn't make any difference, because he hadn't been a real Declan from the beginning, and his attitude toward Uriel wouldn't change whether she was his blood relative or not. The developer decided that Uriel would always be Declan's sister, and decided that this truth needed to be hidden. Ganesha returned to her minions reporting that the professor had indeed changed a lot, and had become quite unlike his former self. The girl reported that after such nice speeches, even such a last scoundrel began to see him from a completely different side of the partner, said that the captain is simply unable to resist handsome, assured that Decline would have liked her even without these words. A fight broke out between them, and one of the partners asked them to calm down, assuming that the captain meant to say that Decline had developed some shred of humanity. Ganesha replied that they no longer had a need to look after Decline. She wanted to ask him if he was still a magical slave, but it didn't seem that way to her. The squad leader informed them that it was time for them to go back, and everyone obeyed her orders. Ganesha said all that they had heard today should be kept secret, advising them to keep quiet about it. Afterward, the team of adventurers held hands and used movement magic. The next day came, and the professor went to the magic tower of the university. Kim Woo-jin decided to look into the in-game store where there was a mana power quality improvement, and the efficiency of his mana could be improved. The price for this improvement was 10 in-game coins. This system gave the player the opportunity to use store currency to improve the game characteristics, as well as he could improve the characteristics of not only his character, but also any other character. The system reported that the player will have several opportunities to use the system store by the end of the second half of the game. He will have only 6 such chances available to him. The thing was that the player could use the store only once per level, and with each level increase, the required amount of currency would increase twofold. The man realized that he should not hurry because he could lose such a valuable opportunity. Kim Woo-jin realized that his daily routine already included daily training, memorizing his physical abilities, and learning levitating blades. But compared to the famous villains, he still lacked combat power. This state of affairs hinted that he should improve his mana quality, so he decided to finish 4 more store currencies as quickly as possible. After a while, an assistant professor came to him and allowed him to enter. Guy asked Declan to take a look at the documentation he'd just gotten. It seemed to the aide that the professor should have been careful, he reasoned, with an article in a magazine for wizards. Kim Woo-jin noticed that a certain Lockhart was wanted. Eyewitnesses reported seeing the so-called destroyer of mages in the suburbs. They asked everyone to refrain from unnecessary walks in the street. The developer knew that Lockhart posed the biggest threat to mages in the first quarter of the game, realizing that he had already begun to act. Of course, if Decline was an ordinary mage, then the mage destroyer could pose a danger to him, but in his current situation, there was no point in the player worrying. The player thought that in this case he might have the opportunity to earn additional currency. Professor assured that there was no point in worrying about it. He was going to the library, stating that the assistant for now leave it. Decline asked Alan if he aspired to be a junior professor, and the kid responded affirmatively. Alan was surprised that the gentleman wanted to recommend him as a junior professor, but remembering that Decline had said he lacked talent, the professor replied that he had changed his mind when he saw the sincerity of his intentions. The player actually received a notice telling him to choose a junior professor. He gave Alan a bracelet engraved with the Uklinov emblem, advising the young man to continue to work hard. The boy was beyond happy. He thanked the professor for the trust placed in him. Alan possessed amazing abilities to organize documents and perform various tasks he could be useful to the game, and so he did not intend to let it get away from him. Kim Woo-jin knew that the previous assistants could not accept Delane's cruelty and simply left. Alan, on the contrary, continued to do all his tasks, suggesting that he too might soon escape. The professor allowed the assistant to leave early today. He handed him money to buy something for dinner. The guy was surprised at such generosity. Alan assured that the sum was too large, but Decline assured that he could spend it entirely as he saw fit. The professor left the assistant, who did not understand what had happened to him because he had never treated him in such a way. Decline came to the staff library. The reason he came here was because of Keegan Moon's research. The man understood that those papers talked about the invention of pure elements, but there were too many errors and omissions, and so he needed to finish this research on his own. Kim Woo-jin supposed it wouldn't be a bad idea to come across some useful grimoire related to manipulation. Noticing the wench, the professor asked what she was doing in the staff library. Sylvia didn't expect to see him here, was a little confused at hearing the question. The girl didn't know what to say to him because she just intended to find the book she needed. 10 minutes ago, the librarian informed Professor Relin that Sylvia wanted to find literature for her research and assured him that this place was for staff only. The professor replied that Sylvia was the heiress of the Illid's family and also a debutante of this year, and this restriction did not apply to her, allowing her to take the necessary textbooks. The librarian assured her that she could read the materials here at her leisure. Sylvia had been studying languages and literature as a hobby, and she came to the staff library to find materials that were simultaneously suitable for both subjects. The novel that she managed to find was written in Etnel after the disappearance of the fairies. The value of this novel increased, and books in Etnel became very rare. It was for this reason that Sylvia had ventured to the staff library. She didn't think she would meet Declan there. The professor intended to ask the student what she forgot in the staff library without knowing about Relin's permission. Declan assumed that her one meeting with the disciplinary committee wasn't enough, but Sylvia had heard that he hadn't been anywhere near the library, and now she was meeting him in person. The girl explained that she had come here in search of a certain document and had gotten permission from Professor Relin in advance. The man stated that such a thing would mean that Professor Relin had ignored the rules of the university, and the local librarian had simply turned a blind eye, deciding that they too would deserve punishment. The professor decided to see what kind of book she was going to read using magic. He moved the book into his hands. He made sure it was a novel on Etnol. Declan assumed that she had chosen to disregard the rules just for the sake of some love story in Etanelian. Sylvia replied that she was interested in literature and other languages. The man handed her the book back, informing her that this time he would turn a blind eye. The professor assured her that if she showed up again without proper authorization, she would be disciplined. So if it wasn't to show off the Illides family's influence, he would send someone else to get the books next time. Sylvia regarded his words as a personal humiliation that made her feel uncomfortable. The girl just wanted to understand the fairies through the novels written on Etnel, but the professor didn't understand her. Sylvia wondered how Declan had managed to read Etnel, for there was no consistency in the language, making it extremely difficult to read. After a while, the students chased a flattering beast that tried to escape from them. As well as in this place, there was a practical training session for young mages. Professor Rathlin reported that this was the first practical training, but the students seemed quite calm. He assumed they were not afraid of the Mountain of Darkness. Relin replied that the training would be over before dark. The Mountain of Darkness was located a short distance away from the university's campus. The mountain was of great importance to the Magic Tower, and because of this, there was a very strict security control. The forest served as both a training ground and a rich storehouse. This place had an extremely high risk of attack by beasts and poisonous creatures, prompting the Magic Tower to set up many protective barriers and provide constant patrols by the professors on duty. Relin informed Declan that they still hadn't decided who their faculty would be on duty this week, asking if he had any ideas on that. Declan replied that he was willing to do it. Riley was pleased that he was willing to set an example for others, and it only proved once again that he really deserved his position. But Kim Woo-jin didn't care about such a noble goal. The developer received a side quest related to the Darkness Magic Tower. He felt something calling out to him, assuming that's why he received this quest. Kim Woo-jin wondered what would happen on this mountain that night. To turn this game into the ultimate horror, Relin informed the guys that it was time to pack up. 9 hours later in a cafe near the Magic Tower, the girl was sorry to eat such delicious desserts. Her friend asked if Ifrin was sure she should have spent the money on something like this. The girl nodded positively because she now had 100,000 LNA. Ifrin assured the comrades that she would pay for these goodies. They were very pleased. Julia had already submitted a plan to form their club, which would soon be approved, suggesting that this would be their first official meeting. The young man hoped that the others wouldn't question their club too much. The girl assured that if their club became successful, people would go to them themselves. She had heard that a practical training session had been held on the Mountain of Darkness. Ifrin said that 50 people had signed up for it, despite the fact that there had been many incidents on the mountain. Suddenly, they heard some strange noises. The students shook. Run outside, they decided to check where the sound was coming from. Ifrin was the first to rush over. They heard someone calling for help. Julia showed them where the screams were coming from. Julia suspected something wrong and tried to stop Ifrin from falling into the trap. Ifrin had gotten too far away from her partner stopping. She interjected what Julia had meant to say but noticed the oddity. The girl found herself in some unfamiliar place. She didn't understand how it happened, because a second ago she was at the coffee shop. The student remembered someone calling for help and started yelling to find out where the victim was. Suddenly a voice was heard calling her to her. Ifrin rushed toward the screams. Noticing the girl, she asked if she was all right. Suddenly, Ifrin noticed that this girl was covered in blood and didn't understand what had happened to her. As she prepared for battle, the student thought they were under attack, but suddenly she noticed a familiar silhouette. Looking more closely, she was convinced it was Professor Decline who had struck out at this girl. Ifrin tried to find out why the professor attacked this girl, not understanding how he could attack a civilian. The professor advised her to take a closer look, saying that this creature was not human. Ifrin was surprised at what she saw. Suddenly, before their eyes, the girl calling for help turned into a huge monster. The student asked what kind of creature the professor believed she was, under the effect of an illusion created by this demon. The man asked the girl to stay out of his way and get out of here. Ifrin noticed strange things happening to her. Kim Woo-jin was ready to begin the hunt and fulfill the side mission of the game to destroy this demon. The man realized that having lost its prey, the creature had gone berserk. Engaging his skills, he tried to strike at the demon that had begun to attack him. Noticing the instantaneous approach, the professor managed to put up a protective block in time for the creature to destroy it. The developer saw the core on the enemy's head and concluded that it was a demon specializing in illusions, but thanks to the attribute of steadfastness, which allowed him to resist mental attacks, the enemy's illusions did not work on the player. Declane's bloodline filled his body with endless rage, and his blood boiled as the system reported that if he was face to face with a demon, the bloodline attribute allowed him to purify the energy around him and turn it into mana. The enemy of all demons was the Eucline heritage of an ancient lineage of demon hunters. It manifested in Decline himself. The player managed to destroy this demon and complete a side quest. He received game currency and also unlocked the Eucline attribute. The professor had noticed that even after its death, the cursed creature continued to spread its foulness. Kim Woo-jin realized that the demon's appearance marked the beginning of everything. He noticed strange things behind him. The developer realized that this was a signal that the game had begun without the player himself. After a while, Ifrin came to her senses. She immediately jumped up from her bunk, intending to see where she was. The employee was glad that the girl came to her senses and asked where she was. Assuring that she could have sworn that she was in the woods, the woman realized that she did not remember anything. The nurse reported that last night a demon appeared on the Mountain of Darkness, and Ifrin fell under its spell and lost consciousness. A little later, she was found and taken to the hospital because of this demon. The entrance to the Mountain of Darkness was blocked, and the Magic Tower began to investigate the incident. The woman pointed out to Ifrin that she had been rescued by Professor Decline, but the girl thought that was unacceptable. The student asked what day it was. The nurse reported that 36 hours had passed since Ifrin had been brought to them. The interlocutors logically came to the conclusion that today is Wednesday. Suddenly, the student screamed that she was late. She immediately ran from the ward to the university. The comrades were surprised to see Ifrin, who had barely made it to the meeting, and they were sure that she had to spend some time in the hospital. Julia saw her friend and offered to sit down with her. She was very happy to see her. Her friend asked if she was all right because she had visited her recently and she was still asleep. Ifrin assured her that she was fine, explaining that after such a long sleep she felt just fine. Ifrin asked what they had going on here. She noticed that their classroom had been remodeled. Julia assumed that there would be a special class today. After that, the professor walked in with his assistant who had the necessary equipment for this class. Ifrin saw the young assistant professor for the first time. She was curious as to who he was. The professor, before beginning his lecture, decided to make one announcement. He introduced Alan, who became his assistant. The students were surprised because Declan never had any assistants, and some of them had heard that this had been the case throughout his career. If a person became a professor's assistant, he could be certified as a professor. Students were convinced that Dekline would never do something like this for the purpose of helping another person. Ifrin was convinced that they were right, because that was the reason why her father had remained a research assistant in his 30s and had never managed to become an assistant professor. The girl didn't know why Dekline had decided to promote some unknown kid. The professor said that today's lecture would be practical. They had to solve the assignments in 3 hours. Alan handed out the necessary items. Ifrin received a bracelet that was a memorable gift from her father, and as this gift became a vessel for her material magic, after every glance at it, she kept asking herself the same question. The girl was curious to know what her father had meant to Professor Dekline, and why he hadn't given her father a chance, and why Dekline was now treating her so well. The student decided to put those questions aside for now and focus on the lecture. She should have remembered some spell as soon as possible, but she had too many thoughts in her head. Suddenly, Ifrin heard that someone had managed to complete a task in 25 minutes and 15 seconds. The students wondered how Sylvia managed to complete the assignment in less than half an hour. The professor stated that she had done everything perfectly and could be free. Sylvia decided to leave the class. As she left, she noticed Ifrin's insistence on completing the task to keep up with her. Sylvia made sure she was better than her and left the classroom with a smile Ifrin couldn't afford to give in to her. After a while, a lot of students were also able to complete their assignments. The students, except for Ifrin, left the classroom, but the girl continued to try to use the spell. Realizing that she was the last one left, Ifrin realized that she was done for, suggesting that she might have been expelled or stripped of the money she had received. The girl tried to think of something in a panic, but nothing but doubts popped into her head. Besides not being able to catch up with Sylvia, she was the only one who hadn't completed the task in the allotted time. Ifrin assumed she was so stupid as to be unable to perform such a simple task. The girl decided that she had overestimated her abilities because she was not in the academy and not equal to these students. Suddenly, the professor announced that it had been 5 hours and 47 minutes. She was surprised to think that no one was here. Dekline asked how long she would keep her waiting without doing her assignment. Ifrin didn't understand why the professor was still here. She noticed his intense gaze on her. The man pointed out that she lost her temper over such a simple assignment and ended up failing to meet the deadline. The student apologized. The professor reported that even if someone mocks her with better results, the girl was shocked to hear such words. She silently continued to listen to him. Dekline stated that even if she was facing her worst enemy, he, as a magician, must always keep his composure. The man pointed out that there was no way she was going to get anywhere near him in that sorry state. Leaving, the professor called it a total disappointment because he thought she was an uncut diamond. Left to herself, the girl decided to return to her seat and complete this task. Ifrin ran her mind over the professor's words about her not being a cut diamond, but didn't realize what to make of it. The student didn't need the opinion of Dekline, whom she considered her enemy, thinking she could handle things on her own. The girl began with everything, still trying to exert her magical powers to accomplish this task. Ifrin decided to do it no matter what it took, believing she would succeed. Kim Woojin stood under the cabinet and watched what was happening. He assumed it would be enough. The professor had spent 6 whole hours on Ifrin, but he realized that it was necessary and all in order to use her power for his own purposes in the coming events. Thanks to the demon's recent appearance on the Mountain of Darkness, he realized that it wouldn't be long before the main quest would begin. When the Age of Absolute knew in the main quest appeared characters that could challenge him, one of these characters was the matured Ifrin. The developer realized that at the moment she lacked moral fortitude and magical flair, but by overcoming those shortcomings, she was able to achieve the unprecedented growth it might have been for Dekline. But Kim Woojin wasn't about to let that happen. Fate is nothing but an excuse for those who refuse to work hard. Kim Woojin only believed in himself alone. The developer, seeing his character, realized that Dekline would never let a debutante get ahead of him. After a few minutes, out of class came Ifrin, who was able to complete the assignment. She went to the dormitory without saying a word. Walking into the classroom, the professor made sure that this student was able to complete the assignment. Dekline stated it took her 6 hours and 25 minutes for this building. The player made sure that in this student collected all the worst habits of those who did not graduate from the academy. He realized that the results of her work are worthy to compete for first place. Kim Woojin knew that it was already time for him to go home. Going outside, he noticed a silhouette. Professor Dekline saw that it was Zeit who intended to speak to him. The man stated to the professor that they hadn't seen him in a long time. The player didn't understand what he was doing here. Zeit von Bruggen-Frieden was the current head of the Frieden family as well as Julia's older brother. He was the one who promoted the idea of Dekline and Julia's engagement, but more importantly, he was superior in pure strength to even Ganesha, making him third place. The developer knew that this character was known for his incredible fighting power. He also didn't understand why such a person would seek out Dekline. The player suggested that the Snowfire Stone he bought back might be to blame. Kim Woojin realized that this situation could then be a demise variable, and there was nothing he could do to counter it at the moment. Zeit von Bruggen-Frieden was glad to see the professor. He was starting to worry about all those rumors that things weren't going well with Julia. That's why the head of the Frighten family decided to hold a dinner party and asked Decline if he was okay with it, so the player made sure he was lucky that Zeit was still friendly with him. The professor replied that he didn't mind. Zeit said that he had always liked his determination and was sure that the restaurant he had chosen would be to his liking, assuring him that the dinner would be on him. Zeit said goodbye menacingly, advising the professor not to be late for this dinner. Kim Woo-jin realized that Zeit had left him no chance to refuse, and something told him he didn't even have that option. The developer knew that for Hate, family was a top priority, but he had no idea how he would react. If Decline caused him to change his plans, he made sure that this meeting really couldn't be cancelled. Come the next day, the Freyden estate was ablaze with uproar over the upcoming dinner. Julia informs her brother that she and Declan hate each other, assuring him that she is busy training other knights and doesn't have time to see him. Zeit assumed he was still sulking at Declan for the Snowfire Stone, but his sister assured him it was nothing of the sort. Her brother asked why she thought Declan had bought a medal that was only suitable for making weapons. Julia said that if he did decide to give her a sword, she would immediately call off the engagement. Julia was angry at this kind of talk because she didn't want to date Declan. Zeit, von Bruggen Frieden, advised his sister to be careful with her expressions. She noticed he was angry with her. The head of the family, Frieden, had already said that breaking off the engagement was sheer folly, assuring her that she need not have any feelings in a marriage of convenience. Zeit declared that no one loved Julie more than Declan, suggesting that she might like someone else, but his sister denied it. Her brother assumed that it would then bother her that Declan had little accomplishment. The girl again replied negatively. Leaving, the head of the family asked his sister to come to dinner, assuring her that if there were any problems between them, they would solve them there. Julia decided to take out her anger on the sword. She started swinging the maple in all directions. Discreetly, Julia von die Frieden was approached by one of the serving warriors to the Frieden family. The henchman informed the mistress that her blade had become too rough. Turning around, she saw Veron. Veron belonged to the Order of Heidekane and served under Julia von die Frieden. The girl apologized to him for having seen her breakdown. Veron assured him that he understood her. The subordinate stated that Declan was not worthy of having a relationship with Julia, and he didn't understand why the head of the family was pushing so hard for this marriage. Julia asked him to stop because a knight shouldn't discuss someone behind their back. The girl assured me it wasn't worth getting my hands dirty for her because she'd be fine. Mistress announced that she was returning by asking the minion to prepare everything for the training. Veron thought he had finally found the answer and now knew how he could prove his loyalty to her as her vassal. The man decided that it was up to him to make his mistress happy. Meanwhile, the professor was on his way to the auditorium to give a lecture and had no idea what awaited him. Rumors began to spread that a demon had appeared on the Mountain of Darkness, which reached the Council of Elders of the Burt region. Magic was created as a means of eradicating evil, and since this case involved a demon, the elders could not just leave it aside. The head ordered letters to be sent to the 12 mage houses. The 12 mages, having received the letters, were to assemble immediately at Bert's call. In the meantime, Kim Woo-jin had finally managed to sort through all the items he had bought at the auction. The Rufferin ring helping him regenerate mana, and the ancient rune necklace allowing him to retain it longer. The player placed the remaining items in the vault as advised by Ganesha. However, he realized that the bottom problem still remained. The most important subject was refusing to cooperate with the professor, and he didn't know how to fix it. The developer realized that he couldn't use the Snowfire Stone right away, but no matter how many times he applied telekinesis to it, it didn't move a millimeter. The player suspected that the stone's mana was resisting his magic, but he didn't know how to use it, and even if he started working with it, he wasn't sure if he could move it with telekinesis. Earlier in the library, Decline had read some text that could help him with this. First, the legendary sword had to be subdued, and this process was called unification. Kim Woo-jin didn't know if this could mean that he should form a self-understanding of the sword. The professor touched the stone, deciding to put the theory he had read into practice. He poured his mana into it. The system reported that his understanding of the subject was 0.1%, and it took him 2,000 mana points to do it. He was convinced that at this rate, it would take him years to do it. Declan decided to prepare for it more thoroughly. Looking at the calendar, he remembered he had a dinner party to attend tonight. Looking below, he saw that in 4 days, there was to be an event that had been planned before he even occupied this body. After a while, people began to gather at Von Michael's restaurant where a dinner party was to be held. Zeit greeted the professor and thanked him for coming after all, assuring him that Julia was already waiting for him inside. The brother went into the hall and told his sister that she looked just fine in that dress. Kim Woo-jin, because Julia always wore her armor, didn't know she could be so beautiful. Now he understood why Declan liked her. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice announced that they had no idea how much labor it had cost her. Zeit was glad that the girl had come, but she assured him that she was just following because she needed to grab Julia's dress. The player didn't even notice at first and also didn't revive to see this person here. Although Josephine tried to pretend that she had just decided to participate in the discussion of the engagement, she was one of the most dangerous characters for Declan. Josephine used any means to achieve her goal. Kim Woo-jin considered her a true sociopath. She was also the leader of a secret intelligence organization called Shadow. Julia was the only person Josephine cared about, so injuring Julia could incur her sister's wrath. Kim Woo-jin had no idea why Josephine still hadn't destroyed Declan, but he sensed it. The player decided not to relax because he realized that if this meeting goes down the drain, he could die. Upon entering the hall and seeing Decline Josephine display her bloodlust, the player was able to see this due to the attribute of the villain's fate. The man realized that the fact that he had sensed Josephine's desire to destroy him meant that this time he was faced with an extremely dangerous ending, and now he needed to prove to Josephine the feelings that Declan had for Julia. Zeit offered to discuss things before the food arrived. He asked the professor when he wanted to have the wedding ceremony, stating that it had been 3 years since their engagement. Julia tried to intervene in their conversation, but her brother ordered her to shut up until they talked. The player didn't know how to properly get out of this situation. The head of the Frieden family insisted that he speak up. After watching Josephine, Kim Woo-jin realized that he shouldn't be harsh about not planning a wedding. Declan offered to leave it up to Julia to make that decision because if she really didn't believe in the marriage, he was willing to break off their engagement. Zeit was surprised that the professor had talked about breaking off the engagement so easily. The head of the Frieden family indicated that the two have been estranged lately. The man said that if that was true, they should think about how to improve their relationship, assuring them that breaking off an engagement was not easy, and the elder of their family did not approve of such a thing. Julia couldn't bear to ask to be allowed to talk to them alone. Zeit was surprised by the request. The head of the Frieden family agreed to leave them, asking Josephine to come out with him. The girl wished them a good chat. Left alone with each other, Kim Woo-jin had no idea what their conversation might have been about. Julia intended to ask Declan what he was up to this time. He remained silent. Translating his gaze, he noticed that the girl was furious. He asked what he was trying to accomplish. Josephine, along with Zeit, stood outside the door listening to her sister's screams but did not interfere. Kim Woo-jin realized that even though Josephine was outside the room, she had heard their conversation. The player decided to choose his words carefully in this case, so that Josephine would not send Declan to the other side of the world. The developer was sure that Julia's sister had installed her own wire in the room and tried to cover it all up with her laughs while leaving, because she couldn't do otherwise. Kim Woo-jin realized that this was a great opportunity for him, because Josephine was not aware that he knew who she really was. Declan genuinely loved Julia, and if the player can make her believe that, he will be able to avoid the current variable demise. The professor replied to the girl that he told her everything as it was, and did not understand her so vehement displeasure. Josephine silently continued to eavesdrop on their conversation, trying to figure out what was really going on between them. Julia was indignant at the response she received, suspecting he wasn't telling the important thing. Declan reported that he too was unable to break off their engagement, assuring them that things had gone too far. The girl didn't realize this assumed he had decided to torture her again, and this time, Julia said that even before they met, he had used his connections to make the engagement happen. But the elder Frieden family had been promised compensation and asked if he remembered the words he had spoken to convince her. The player tried to negate this tense conversation. The girl pointed out that he was talking about battles being dangerous. The girl was sure that because of this, he tried to make her refuse to join the Imperial Order by offering her to become a captain of the Order of Hadakane, ruled by the Ukline family. But when she refused, he started spreading rumors about her. Julia decided to repeat her question to see what Declan was trying to accomplish this time. Kim Woo-jin knew exactly what she was talking about. Declan confused his obsession and hyperfixation on always having Julia around with sympathy. Declan allowed everything around her so that she had no choice but to stay with him. The player realized that this character had done unforgivable things. That's why the developer understood the reason for her hatred of Declan. He assured her it wouldn't happen again, but Julia didn't believe him. The man realized he'd been trying to restrain her in every way. Julia was surprised he'd brought it up. Declan realized he'd done the wrong thing. The girl couldn't believe she was hearing those words from him. The professor added that it wasn't just about him because her older brother and sister had also gone too far. The man assured that if it were really true, they would not have objected to the dissolution of the engagement, for it was done to improve the reputation of the Frieden family. The player was sure that Julia wanted to leave her family to fulfill a dream and become a defender. The girl was shocked, not understanding how he knew about it because they had never talked to him about it. Declan informed the girl that he had no integrity or loyalty. Julia asked what he was even talking about. The professor assured her that he was not suitable for her because he was the exact opposite of what she was aiming for, and asked her to get to the point. The man could do only one thing for her. He said that they could keep their engagement, but never marry. He wanted her to be free with all his heart, but because of the circumstances, he could not do it. Declan indicated that she could use his name for her protection, as long as she wished. He intended to keep their engagement going until her dream began to materialize. Julia didn't believe his words. She tried to find out what he was up to and why he was saying all this now. The professor said all this without expecting any response, but it was what he dreamed of. The man reported that he wanted Julia to smile at him at least once a month. Declan assured that was all he was asking. Julia didn't expect to hear such a thing from him. Hearing this, Josephine was also shocked by his words. Sight didn't understand his sister's reaction. For the sake of avoiding a variable demise, Kim Woo-jin spoke the words she wanted to hear. However, how much his words confused Julia, it all seemed very nice. The girl did not understand why he suddenly asked her for something like that. The player just couldn't help but recognize the fact that he had adopted the feeling of love that Declan felt for Julia. Julia informed him that however it was so easy she wouldn't believe him and wouldn't fall for his tricks again. Josephine realized that as awkward as it sounded, Declan's feelings for Julia were genuine, and she wondered if she should continue to eavesdrop on them. The system informed the player that he had managed to avoid a variable demise. He received in-game currency. 3 days had passed since the dinner party, and Declan had come home from work as usual. The man made sure that the 3 days flew by so imperceptibly, and the anniversary date of his demise arrived. The player visited the cemetery, which was quite a unique place in this game. The very atmosphere was capable of awakening a strong emotion in a person. The sunset light crept through the weeds and cracks of the tombstones the player followed to the grave. Kim Woo-jin's heart arrived here before his body and ended up merging with this place where his memories were stored. The man realized that it was his present memories buried here. Kim Woo-jin remembered his real life and Inwa Arana, who he had to break up with. Earlier, the developer was told that they intend to add to the game Pasahalka. He did not understand what exactly we are talking about. Inwoo Ara said that she had an idea for a small detail that she would like to add to Declan, since he is an intermediate boss. The man replied that it would add to their workload, saying that they were already working night shifts and he was sure that it would have no effect on the game's sales, suggesting that it would not add to their workload. The boss assured that it was also important in its own way because they had to put their whole soul into this game. It seemed to Kim Woo-jin that the leader of their company liked nonsense too much, stating that she could do as she pleased since she didn't mention it to hear his opinion anyway. Inve Ara thought it was a good idea, and it wouldn't be pointless since Declan had a fiancé once upon a time. The girl was always animatedly describing ideas that seemed fun. The developer didn't understand what she found fun about it. The developer was wondering what Inva Ara had left as a pass-through, and what made it so much fun. Kim Woo-jin, being in the game world, decided to find these traces to get his memories back. As he approached the grave, he noticed that Inwoo Ara had made her own grave in the game. He didn't understand what she did it for. Decline was created in Kim Woo-jin's image, and the developer didn't understand why she used her name as the name of Decline's deceased fiancé. One constant phrase managed to puncture Kim Woo-jin's emotions that he only experienced in this place. The developer thought for a second that he heard Inwoo Ara whispering, and was flooded with memories of bygone days. The man remembered how his lover had praised his illustrations with a shy smile, the way she had given him her coat one night when he was freezing cold. Kim Woo-jin also remembered how Inwoo Ara held his hand and told him she loved him, and how he cheered him up when he had no strength. 7 years together didn't go unnoticed. He realized it was his and her memories. The enemy spotted Declan alone on the grave, deciding it was the perfect moment for payback. Kim Woo-jin calmed down as if he hadn't been crying at all, and at times like this, Declan's temper came in handy. After a moment, the professor noticed a familiar face and realized that Lokar was in front of him. The mage destroyer was surprised that he knew him. He stated that such a vain and arrogant mage dared not approach him. Lockhart was a villain and a mini-boss accessible only to mages. The reason Lockhart was able to become the natural enemy of all mages was because of his ability to nullify magic. The developer knew that, like in all other games, the attribute of zeroing could be equated to a cheat. The man realized that Lockhart's attribute had no tangible limitations. He didn't need direct physical contact. Magic simply didn't work within the radius of Lockhart's ability, and that's why he sent mages to the other side of the world so easily. Lockhart headed towards his opponent and called him a fool, assuring him that magic doesn't work on him. Declan managed to deftly dodge his opponent's lunges, but he kept coming at him. Suddenly, Lockhart jumped up and decided to strike at this mage from the top since he was so adept at dodging ground attacks. The perpetrator intended to finish the job, believing he had the upper hand. Unexpectedly for Lockhart, the mage managed to land a powerful blow on him that made him change his confidence. Declan stated that it didn't matter to him, the perpetrator didn't understand how he did it. A few days ago, Kim Woo-jin finally managed to collect 10 coins and use them to acquire the mana quality improvement. Because of this, he was able to increase the effectiveness of his mana manipulation. He noticed that all senses were now different. The professor could now unleash much more power using the same amount of mana as before. The player suspected that this improvement had a much greater effect on him. She decided to start a daily routine. Suddenly grabbing the bar, he noticed that he had accidentally squeezed it. He thought he had improved his physical strength as well. The system informed the player that he had managed to overcome a variable demise by defeating Lockhart. Kim Woo-jin had expected roughly the same result from the improvement in mana quality, which also affected his attributes. Using the Iron Man attribute, he was able to defeat Lockhart. But the fact that his attribute had become stronger made it easier than he thought. Lockhart stated that he should have gotten rid of all the rotten mages long ago. The criminal stated that such mages have betrayed God himself by reporting that the Soaring Bird Islands and the Magic Tower, they are all madmen. A unique ability that could be compared to a cheat was incredible anger directed towards mages, and the fact that he used the word renegades spoke of one thing. Decline assumed Lockhart was Scarlet-born. He didn't understand how he managed to guess. The criminal tried to find out how the mage knew about it, but he looked at him silently. The Purple-born got their name from the fact that they came into the world wrapped in a blood-red shell, and it was said that their kind originated from ancient demons. Such people lived on this continent hiding their identities and were the direct opposite of mages. Magic was created to counter demons. Then the conflict between the mages and the Purple-born race was central to the creation of this world, as well as one of the main storylines of this game. Declinam von Grahan Uklein approached Lockhart to finish what he had started, and he began to back away. Kim Woojin knew that because of their origins, the Purple-born were always in danger. The developer assumed that right at that time there might have been a cleanup going on somewhere. Decline stated that he understands Lokwarka because he had to experience an era of oppression. The professor added that by destroying an innocent mage, he would only be likened to these monsters. Lockhart ordered him to shut his mouth, saying he didn't understand anything at all, asking him to just follow through with what he had planned. The man said that he understood everything perfectly well because he knew that the Scarlet-born were not guilty of anything. The criminal didn't understand his intentions. He called him a pathetic mage who can't destroy the enemy. The professor said he was a Declan from the Uklein family, an ancient noble family that still has its dignity. Lockhart assumed he was showing off before he destroyed it. The man reported that the only time he lost his temper was when confronted by a demon. Decline pointed out that the Uklano legacy of hunting demons since ancient times made his blood boil at the sight of them. The professor asked Lockhart to say whether he had lost his temper in his presence. The perpetrator did not understand what he was saying. The man in addition asked if he had succumbed to his provocation. Decline told Lockhart that he was a human being the first time he had ever heard such words addressed to him. Lockhart realized it was a composure worthy of a true nobleman. The professor assured the criminal that he could trust him. They noticed the guards approaching them. Decline asked Lockhart to hold still and let him be arrested, but he couldn't move after the blow. The man introduced himself as Inspector Ropa and apologized for coming so late. Ropa said that the gentleman had an excellent punch, assuring him that this criminal deserved it. He offered to hit him again, but Decline assured him that there was no need. After the professor started working his magic to bind this criminal, the inspector couldn't think that magic could be so amazing. Decline pointed out that Locare was capable of neutralizing magic. The professor also assured him that magic handcuffs were powerless against him, and he handed him a steel wire, which made it clear to Rope why the criminal was able to escape. Decline pointed out that despite this, the inspectors arrived on the scene even too quickly, assuming that they were somewhere nearby. The inspector said that they had arrived here in response to a message, thinking that he had not sent it to them. The professor replied that someone else had apparently reported it on hearing the commotion here. The professor stated that he had to go. The inspector thanked him and wished him good luck. Kim Woojin was satisfied that he had managed to solve everything without resorting to bloodshed. He didn't want to hurt anyone. Leaving the man didn't want to sabotage the place where Inwu Ara's stay still remained. A day passed. Declan was informed that a meeting had been called in Bertha for the first time in 15 years. The professor assumed that Juriel had personally come to him to hand over the paper. Her sister replied that he didn't care about her and had to do it. Juriel stated that she was the head of the family and he just had to take care of her members. She asked her brother to put some on herself. Upon reading the letter, the player learned that a demon had appeared on the Mountain of Darkness during a recent incident, and as a result, the Berthas wanted to summon all the mages to discuss it. The system informed him of a new main quest called Convocation of Bertha's Brother, indicated that the meeting would take place in weeks, and 2 companions, including 1 bodyguard, could be taken with him. Juriel asked if he would need a bodyguard and assured him that he could ask Jeff, but his brother assured him that there was no need. Declan pointed out that if it came to Jeff, who was now more interested in driving than practicing his gun skills, he'd refuse to let Juriel think that sounded rude. His sister was sure he couldn't go to the meeting without a bodyguard. The girl stated that while traveling to Bert, he could easily die, but his brother was sure otherwise. The man assumed that she was worried about him, but Juriel assured him that it wasn't so, because the fact was that she couldn't let him die until she became the official head of their family. His sister assured him that he could leave the matter of bodyguards to her because she knew reliable people. Meanwhile, at the Frieden Orders base, a lot of guys were going through their daily training. Julia stated that they were doing a great job ordering them to stay focused. The vice captain didn't understand what he should do in such a case, but suddenly Veron came to him from behind and asked what he was talking about. The man was startled out of his unexpected head. He asked Veron to make some sort of sound when walking. The vice captain reported that the Frieden Order had been offered a serious assignment, but he didn't know if they should take it. Julia asked to share her worries. The man reported that this assignment had to do with guarding Declan. Veron was surprised by that. The vice captain added that the whole train would have to be guarded, but they knew that if it was only about Declan, they would definitely refuse. So the customers decided to dilute it. Suddenly, Veron asked him to accept this assignment. He thought that not everyone would be fit to guard an entire train. and if they could accomplish this task, the fame of their order would increase dramatically. Veron added that the reward for this assignment would be a great help in financial matters, assuring that Captain Julia was not the kind of person to let personal feelings get in the way of an assignment. The man asked if he was right about that. The vice captain decided to go over everything and discuss it with Julia so that nothing bad would arise. The mountains in the northern part of the continent were called Bercht. They were 3 kilometers high, and they were also called the dwelling place of the elders. Bercht is the place where all the ideas of all the wizarding schools from all over the continent were gathered. Even the flying island of mages was subject to the decisions made there. Birch's influence was so great that this place could be called a pillar of the magical world, and since the assembly was convened very rarely once every few decades, mages knew that to be summoned to Bercht was both an honor and recognition of a mage's prominence. Called from Bercht at the same time, this place had a bad name called the Graveyard of Mages. After a while, the mages assembled for departure to Birch at the station. They were waiting for the train to depart from the platform. Julia asked if all preparations were finished. Vice the commander answered affirmatively. Alan was shocked that it snowed so much in April, making sure they were really up north. Julia informed Declan that from this transfer station, the Order of Freyheim will assume responsibility for guarding the first half of the train. The girl assured that they would make every effort to provide security so that his train ride would pass comfortably. Julia remembered a past conversation with Declaim when he asked her to smile at him. The girl wondered if she should smile at him right now. She couldn't decide which smile to show him. The captain didn't understand why she was even like this. Despite her genuine hatred for Declaim, she was willing to try her best for him. Suddenly, a man approached the professor and introduced himself as Veron. They didn't know him. Veron reported that this time defense duties were assigned to him, assuring that the captain and vice captain had sewn to show Declan their respect. The vice captain assured that Veron was a skilled warrior and respected in their order, and so the professor had nothing to worry about. Kim Woojin, hearing those words, decided to check him with his keen eyesight just in case. The player didn't feel any particular energy from him, assuming he was winding himself up. Veron reported that most of the mages had been issued escorts, including the Decline wagon, which Veron would be in charge of. Julia announced that it was time for her to go back and wish them a happy journey. After the girl left them, the men escorted her with their gaze. Suddenly, the professor noticed that she turned around. Declan didn't expect to see a smile on her face that seemed embarrassed. He realized she had kept her promise. It was several hours after departure that the train moved along the snow-covered route to Bercht. The professor allowed his assistant to sleep if he was tired, assuring him that they still had a few hours to go. Alan agreed to take a nap. The invocation from Brecht, also called the Graveyard of Magicians, was the reason Brecht was called a pillar of the magical world, despite the rather controversial second person. All because of an unexpected event that happened every time Brecht called an assembly was an attack on a train. Successfully overcoming this, one of the many possible demises of Declan, required a game of wits, or rather the player had to choose the safest train from all the ones going to Brecht. Kim Woojin that the safe option is to use shady connections and find out information about which train will be attacked. The developer assumed that if there was a real Declan in his place, he'd be sure to do so. However, in his case, there is no way to do so since Kim Woojin cut such ties after becoming Decline. That's why the player made some preparations to protect himself. He mined the martial arts technique of the legendary warrior Estran and realized its understanding. A few days ago, the professor had offered Alain to go with him to Bercht as an assistant, assuring him that he could refuse. The young man thanked him, assuring him that he was honored by such a thing. Decline pointed out that if he didn't stop blowing snot out of his nose, he wouldn't take him with him. Kim Woojin did not expect Alan to agree because this train was too dangerous, assuming that he had great ambitions. After a while, the train stopped at the Pironne. Declan made sure they had one station left. He thought it strange that nothing had happened, yet assuming he had picked the right train. The player suspected that all his preparations were in vain before leaving. He used the Midas touch on items from the famous wizard to increase their defense characteristics. The developer also reinforced the wood steel products that spread throughout the train. The professor improved Alan's attire. His one piece was greatly improved by Midas's touch. Kim Woojin realized that he had been using Midas touch so much lately that he had almost no mana left, assuming it should have been spent on something else. The man realized that it would be even better if nothing happened, despite his preparation. The player hoped that the rest of the way would be just as peaceful. The train pulled into the bridge that ran through the gorge. Suddenly, after the professor's thoughts, there was a massive explosion that brought his hopes to naught. A few days before Declan's departure for Bergt, a train of another train was moving to the same place on this track. Giltion von Ludwig Illadz asked his daughter how things were going with the assignments in the Magic Tower. Sylvia assured me that there were quite a few of them, but she missed a couple of lectures. Her father pointed out that even though she was destined to become an archmage in the future, she still worked harder than anyone else. The daughter replied that if she wasn't capable of even such a small thing, she wouldn't be destined to become an archmage. Sylvia wasn't worried about Eifrin. The point was that she wanted to attend as many of Declan's lectures as possible. The girl asked her father why they had gone to the Bercht meeting so early, since they could have gone a few days later. Giltian asked if she knew that the road to Bercht was also called the Tomb of the Magi. Sylvia thought it was just another scare story. The father assured his daughter that it was not so. She was surprised at this asking for a more similar story. The man told that every time a meeting was called in Bertha, several mages lost their lives. 15 years ago, 11 mages died. Giltian added that since ancient times, participation in this gathering was considered a sign that her family had the necessary prestige, and if they were chosen from among 20 families, their name could be considered to be written in history forever. However, the selected families who failed to reach the meeting were permanently excluded from the list according to another rule, and their place was taken by a new family. Her father asked how his daughter thought it would be easiest to get rid of one of these prestigious families. Sylvia couldn't believe it. Traveling to Bercht was like walking on thin ice, where those willing became new members of the assembly and hunted for the lives of current members. Sylvia was shocked at what was happening and realized what was the reason for her father's haste. Gilteon von Ludwig Eladz received information that a certain group of people were planning to attack the next train, and since Sylvia was traveling with him, he wanted to take all possible precautions. The daughter assumed that if they were discovered, there would be more problems. Her father decided to explain everything to her because he realized that sooner or later she would face the cruelty of this world. The man told his daughter that not all 12 traditional families took their places, but if someone had to be punished for such acts, everyone was punished. Giltian stated accidents that occurred on the way to this meeting were considered to be destruction due to natural causes. The train to Klein von Grehan-Uklein was on was booby-trapped, and someone planned it in advance. Sleepy Alan woke up to the explosion and didn't realize what had happened. He noticed that the professor was acting calm. When the deputy looked back and saw a hole forming in the car behind him, he informed Declan that their train was under attack. The train, with the help of unknown magic, began to float in the air, derailed by the explosion. The professor breathed a sigh of relief that their train hadn't fallen into the abyss and the other passengers weren't hurt. The system informed the player that the memorization of basic telekinesis was complete, and they only managed to survive thanks to Estron's martial arts and the basic telekinesis he memorized before they left. The criminals noticed that an entire train was floating in the air. They suspected it was the work of the head professor. The man said that they expected such a thing and ordered everyone to be on the lookout for a huge reward for this mission. The criminals used a rope to get into the car through the hole. Kim Woojin had expected them to appear, and so he used his fighting skills. Alan was shocked at what was happening. The young man told the professor that they had run into an ambush, and he didn't know what to do in such a case. Decline advised Alan to take a break for a bit. He gave him a deft kick to the back of the head to keep him out of the way and out of harm's way. The professor ordered Veron to carry his assistant to safety and was to help the other passengers with evacuation. Alan's neck seemed surprisingly smooth and soft. He could only feel it because of the Iron Man's attribute. Declan decided to ponder that a little later and in the meantime, attend to more pressing matters. The professor said that since the criminals started it all, they must be aware of the rumors here. Declan indicated that they would die here today for natural causes. They noticed the magical aura. A few minutes later, Kim Woojin realized that this battle was a little more exhausting than he thought it would be, and he managed to get the upper hand on the criminals. After the damage reduction from the explosion and the battle with the attackers, his magic was almost at an end. The professor noticed Veron's return and reported that all the remaining passengers were safe. Decline indicated that it was time for them to get out of here as well. Kim Woojin noticed that this guy was looking at him with a different look than before. The player was also confused by this ambush despite expecting it, thinking Veron was panicking too. Suddenly, the professor felt she sent a debilitating aura. It was an attribute of the fate of the villain. Decline suspected that all this time the Woai had been sapping his power and he'd let his guard down. Veron was glad that the professor had survived because he thought he would die at his hands. The warrior assured that there was no one else left here who could help him, and it was Declane's turn to die. The player dared to question him to find out who ordered Veron to do this to him, suggesting it could have been Julia. Veron ordered him to be silent, saying that he would not forgive him for speaking his mistress's name, for she was a true knight who had never intended such a thing. The warrior told the professor that he would die at the hands of his mother, for whose sake he was willing to do anything. The player was convinced by Veron's reaction that Julia had nothing to do with it. Then memories popped into his head. The vice captain said that Veron was a respected warrior of their order. Declane only had 10 mana units. He didn't know if he could defeat someone like that in his current state. Veron declared that his defense duties were over and he began to attack the professor. Kim Woojin realized that there was only one way for him to survive. He canceled the telekinesis that was holding the train, and it began to fall. In the meantime, the servant offered her to taste more ice cream, which was made in Bercht, but Sylvia refused, assuring her that she had had enough and could not look at it. Sirio, the night guard of the Elad's family, heard someone's voices. He was upset that the mistress refused dessert. The man reported that aside from Decline and Eohielm von Harry and Ravinda had all gathered. Sirio left and said that if she needed anything she could call him. Sylvia was worried about Declan. Earlier, the girl did not plan to peep earlier the professor. She just came to the grave of her mother. Sylvia visited her mother that day to talk to her. It was an ordinary day, no different from any other day. The girl informs her mom that Professor Decline is terrible and assigns a lot of subjects. Suddenly, the student heard sounds that reached her. She decided to see who it was. Following the noise, Sylvia noticed that Professor Decline was nearby with her. Even faulting his hunched back, she could feel his noble presence. At a glance, she unmistakably recognized him. Sylvia was curious to know what he was doing in such a place. She didn't think such a man would mourn someone. The student noticed tears on the man's face. It was the first time she had seen him cry. Decline had always been cold and stern, but now standing at the grave shed tears. It seemed incredible to Sylvia. She'd always thought of him as an irritating professor who always behaved lofty and stately, but even he had memories of love gone. The professor's tears were like shooting stars. They kept invading Sylvia's mind. The girl remembered her father's words, who had received information that a certain group was planning to attack the trains. This information had been worrying Sylvia since that lecture by Declan. She wanted to try something. The student decided to try to use the Mana Stone as a guide. Using the 3 attributes of magic, first used spells as a source, and Sylvia's magic, consisting of the 3 primordial elements, began to use the Mana Stone as a conductor took form. The girl managed to get the original colors of the creation. She had a magical bird on her hand. Sylvia gave this bird the name Shoestrike. She asked her to help her see what she wanted. The student asked Shoestrike to fly and show her everything he sees along the way. Meanwhile, Declan thought he was lucky, for the train had caught on a ledge and had not fallen to the ground. The professor believed he had a few broken bones he could quickly recover thanks to the Iron Man. Suddenly, the man felt anger on him. He noticed that Veron had also recovered from his fall and intended to attack him. Decline was able to dodge the attack of an opponent who intended to follow through. The professor intended to retaliate, but Veron used his protective Qui field to counter him. Veron stated that he was tough. He continued to launch attacks, but the professor, using telekinesis, tried to fight him off. Kim Woojin saw by example that this warrior was strong. He knew he had to think of something, or he would die. Veron was much stronger than the professor now, but even in perfect condition, Decline wouldn't have been able to defeat him. The player knew that Decline would never bow in such a situation. Determination activated in the battle, and constantly maintained mental strength until the end of the fight. The professor put up a magic block to defend himself, but the enemy managed to break through it. Kim Woojin realized that there was no way he could avoid being killed by Veron. One successful sword strike could send the professor to the other world, and the game could be over for Kim Woojin. The developer didn't know whether he would open his galas afterward in his office or not. Meanwhile, unnoticed, Sylvia's Shoestrike flew up to the train where the fight was taking place. Suddenly, there was some kind of strange spatial fluctuation throughout the carriage. After that, Veron's hand holding the sword flew away from his body. The men didn't realize what had happened. Decline didn't know what had happened, but made sure it was his chance for survival that he couldn't pass up. This was followed by a punch from the professor that caused Veron to fall through the hole in the wagon. The warrior didn't intend to just give up. He grabbed his knife and tried to grab the ledge. Veron hovered over the precipice, realizing that luck had shifted to Declan's side in this situation. Declan walked over to his hanging opponent, who decided he wanted to throw him off the wagon. Veron asked what he had done and how he had managed to cut off his left arm so lightning fast. The professor assured that he had no idea what had happened, stating that what was more important was why he was trying to ruin him. Decline did not understand to cross him in any way. Veron replied that he remembered all the atrocities he had committed against Mrs. Julia. The man was surprised that he'd actually attacked him for Julia, even though she hadn't asked him to. The professor intended to find out from Veron who Julia was to him, that he was willing to do such a thing for her. The adversary replied that Decline would never understand him, for he thought him a heartless wretch. A few years ago, a married couple thanked Julia, who saved them from a young man. The girl replied that she was merely fulfilling her duties as a knight, and it wasn't worth a thank you. The young man asked to be released because he had done nothing wrong, assuring that it was another guy who had started it all. The woman stated that her Jason was very kind and could not be at fault for what happened. Julia watched the argument in silence, not knowing what was really going on between them. The woman threatened young Veron that she would turn him over to the police, advising him to beg for mercy. The lady was sure that Veron had hit her son, and therefore believed that he would be convicted because he had also entered their house illegally. Julia intervened in their conversation when she heard that this guy was trespassing on her property. The woman responded positively, saying that his behavior was very appropriate for his social status. Julia realized that he had managed to get over the high walls, as well as she noticed that he was quite skinny. The girl knight assured the madam that she herself will deliver him to the police. Assuring that she can continue not to participate in this, she agreed to her proposal. Veron asked to be released, assuring that he was just defending himself and had done nothing to lead him to the police. Julia replied that the Frisia family was famous for their behavior, and she was sure he was telling half the truth. Veron assured that he was telling the absolute truth. The girl declared that it was not good to hit people anyway, and she removed the restraining ropes from him. Julia said that if he followed her, she would teach him self-control. He did not expect such an offer. Young Veron asked if he would be provided with food, and she responded positively, and that was their first meeting. Veron then became part of the Order of Knights and worked hard to improve his skills. However, due to his childhood and character, he could not get along with the rest of the knights. The only one who cared about him was Julia, who could help him with his problem. Veron assured his mistress that everything was fine, for it was as long as he was near his captain. Mrs. Julia was always in front of Verona. She was also always helping other residents. The captain did not tolerate injustice and rejected any offer of bribes. Veron's respect and admiration for Julia grew with Veron exactly as his love in her. Veron knew that his emotions would only hurt Mistress Julia, and knew that they would become a burden to her. Voni stated that no matter what, he intended to destroy Declan or he would one day ruin his mistress's life. Kim Woojin realized that Veron was right because everything bad that happened in the game was just a butterfly effect of Declan's actions. The professor pointed out that he was wrong because he intended to change what Declan had done and make sure that Declan's story did not end in destruction. The man reached out to his attacker. Veron was surprised at such an act from his opponent. Declan took his hand for he had no intention of hurting Julia. He asked to trust him. Suddenly, the professor felt the malevolent aura of Veron, who intended to destroy him. Declan made sure his opponent wasn't going to change his mind even after hearing Veron say he would destroy him no matter what. The professor said that this stupid choice would torment Julia for the rest of her life, and he decided to deal with Veron once and for all. Meanwhile, Julia felt something vice. The captain thought she wasn't feeling well, but the girl assured that she was fine. The vice captain assumed she was worried about Verona again, assuring him that he could take care of himself. Falling into the abyss, Veron hoped that his beloved mistress would be happy. Using magic, Sylvia saw that Declan had ruined his guard and he fell into the abyss. The student knew that the knight first tried to ruin the professor and he destroyed him defending himself. Suddenly, her observation was interrupted by Sirio telling her that they should get back as the meeting was about to start. The girl followed her henchman, not knowing if Declan would make it to the meeting on time. Meanwhile, Lily Fremian, Deputy Chief of Security, arrived at the scene of the incident. The deputy was told that first there was an explosion and then there was an attack, and the man assured her that it was nothing unusual as the Brecht meeting was approaching. Lily Fremian asked if the injured men reported no injuries, but two were missing, a guard named Veron and Professor Decline. The staff pointed Alan out, assuring her that he could tell her the details of what happened. The girl noticed the young man and asked what was wrong with him. She thought he was still unconscious from the shock. One of the survivors reported that the knight saved him, assuring him that the train was suspended in the air for a while, and when he woke up, it had already fallen. The deputy safety officer was shown a photograph showing that the train was indeed hovering in the air. Lily Fremian suggested that he lifted the entire train into the air with magic. The girl couldn't believe suddenly she was informed that the knight Veron had died, and Veron had tried to ruin Declan. Lily Fremian was surprised to receive a telepathic message from someone. The survivors noticed someone approaching them and turned around to see for themselves. People saw that it was Professor Decline who looked tired and injured. Kim Woojin realized that if it wasn't for the strange phenomenon, he would have been killed by a knight who didn't even have a name in the game. He didn't know who helped him then. Lily Fremian was glad to see that the professor was all right. She introduced herself to him, informing him that she had questions regarding the incident. Declan asked what time it was. The girl said 4:30. The man realized he had 6 hours left before the meeting. The girl assured that these questions are a mere formality. Declan asked if this is the only way to Brecht. Lily replied that there is also a road and a sea route on the other side. Lilia was outraged at being interrupted. She asked to hear her out. To the end, she tried to find out about the knight who was with Declan. Looking up, she didn't see the professor beside her. She asked where he had gone. The men assumed he had used acceleration magic. The girl pointed out that despite protecting the train from derailing with telekinesis and battling assassins, and Veron Decline was able to use high-level magic, she was curious to know how much mana she had. Lily realized that this was the Professor Lockhart had told her about. A short time later, the Brecht meeting began and many mages took their seats. Giltion pointed out that it was now 5 to 10. The time when the stars were gathering, Sylvia noticed that Decline hadn't arrived yet. Before beginning the meeting, the elder wanted to give a humble thank you to those who answered the call. The girl sensed the incredible mana that filled this hall. She assumed it was Dezikden, the Grand Elder of Brecht. He was a prime candidate to become an archmage. He was a living legend who left secular society for his own reasons. Sylvia realized that she had to reach at least his level to compete for the title of archmage. Dezekdan said that after clarifying the list of arrivals, they would start their meeting. First asked if Giltion was from the Illide family, the latter answered positively. After named Etensil from the Brand family of Barun, from the Veordan family of Ihielm, after it was Decline's turn. Those present noticed that Declaim had not yet arrived. Sylvia became even more worried. The elder stated that if he did not arrive before he called his name 3 times, he would consider the professor to have failed to answer the call, and would be expelled from the 12 spellcasters. Sylvia heard talk that the Euclines might be excluded. They were among the first 12 convened 2 centuries ago. The man assured that the current head of the Declan was no match for his ancestors, and his interlocutor agreed. The girl marveled that Declan had managed to live his life without anyone to worry about him. Such talk disturbed Sylvia, for she was sure that the professor was not like that at all. Dissecton began to say Declan's name. The name was uttered twice. The attendees were sure he would be gone. Suddenly, Sylvia heard the door open. She hoped it was the professor. Those present saw that Declan von Grahan Eucline had managed to get to them. Sylvia von Josephine Illids exhaled a sigh of relief, because she knew what had happened to the professor on the way here. Declan reported that the head of the Euclines had arrived, and some faces appeared unsatisfied. The meeting began in silence and quickly progressed. The first topic was the appearance of the demon on the Mountain of Darkness. Atensil stated that this was more important than the demon appearing in the capital, because every school had to issue an order or interact with the church, and mages had to be sent to suspicious regions. The first topic was quickly wrapped up by Atensil. The head of the Brand family voiced her opinion, and since no family was against it, it was quickly over. After a short break of the meeting was announced, those present could rest for a while. The break was a lifesaver for Declan, who had been through a lot this day. He had run here like a madman to not be late for the meeting, and now he had no mana or strength. Kim Woojton realized that even in this state, Declan's appearance was still perfect. Afterward, the professor was approached by Alan, who was very worried about him. Alan apologized for his tardiness and was told he had no right to enter a meeting that had already begun. Declan assured him he was fine. The man could no longer think of Alan as an innocent child, assuming there was something wrong with him. Kim Woojin was reminded of a famous quote from a famous movie from a past life. He asked Alan to just stand by his side. The quote spoke of keeping friends close and enemies even closer. Declan decided to keep an eye on him. The player intended to find out what Alan was like no matter what. After the break was over, the elder brought up the next topic, which was to decide what to do about the red-skinned wizard who had appeared. Kim Woojin realized that this was a pretty hot topic, deciding that it obviously wouldn't end as quickly as the first one. Vaden stated that the race of redskins were like parasites they were secretly breeding, laying offspring in their society, infecting their lands. Atensil asked him to produce evidence because they have no way of distinguishing the redskin race from others. Someone pointed out that they could invent such an opportunity to identify them because they must destroy the redskins as soon as possible using the Imperial Magic Tower. Declan knew such opinions would clash with each other. Vaden explained that the redskins were recognizing each other and getting together. He was sure they had a leader and didn't know what they were up to. Atensil assured that it was just a rumor. She asked Vaten not to be so reckless. The man marveled at the very thought of a redskin leader secretly gathering his kin, and them knowing nothing about it didn't disgust her. Vaten stated that countless mages had died because of her indecision 60 years ago. Giltion decided to ask what the head of the Ukline family thought about all this. Sylvia's father added that the Declan family was a family of great exorcists that had been at the tip of the spear in destroying demons for years. Kim Woojin, as a real person, was well versed in such situations. The hatred that came from refusing to think about such topics always led to unnecessary misfortune. The player realized that persecuting the Redskins was wrong, deciding that he must hold them off as long as possible for the sake of a future main quest. The man knew that the common enemy of this world was not the red-skinned race, but someone else. Decline replied that in long ago times, the race of Redskins had indeed been the enemy of his family. The professor summarized that if you scrutinize the documents, it turns out that misunderstandings are to blame. 237 years ago, during the Rodran witch incident, he was accused despite his innocence, but because of this, pogroms broke out and many Redskins were exterminated. Decline pointed out that the incident they mentioned, which happened 60 years ago, was simply politics, for a simple mine of mana stones had been discovered on the land of the Redskins. Varen stated that when the Uklines took the mine, he wasn't entirely sure that their bloodline had an admixture of demonic energy. The professor said that the Ukline family's tradition is to destroy demons. Not the red-skinned race. Varen replied that the red-skinned are demons. Decline asked Daring to take credit for such words. Alan watched in silence. The man said that one should not be so cavalier in declaring people to be demons, for he who says such things may become a demon himself. Thus, the meeting reached an impasse and the subject was postponed. Until the next day, Giltion was sorry that his daughter would have to stay until the next meeting. The man said that by rule there could only be one invitee per room in Brecht. Asking if she would be okay, Sylvia replied that her peers had long since come to life in a separate room from her parents. Sylvia read the rules and concluded that they were designed to strike fear into small children. She decided to sleep. During the night, the girl woke up thirsty and went to the table for a drink of water. Suddenly, Sylvia felt some strange action. She thought there was a rift in space. The girl noticed that her room suddenly turned into a hallway. She didn't realize what happened. Sylvia hurriedly reread the rules of the place, suspecting she had done something wrong. The student found out that after she went to bed, she had to stay awake until the morning, or she would risk ending up somewhere else. Sylvia realized that there were no such magical phenomena in the second lobby where they had stayed a couple of days ago. She assumed it was because she was near the meeting room. The girl let herself relax, thinking that everything would be fine until she left the walls of her room. The student tried to calm down, but was unable to do so when she heard strange noises coming from the room. Sylvia realized that there was something there she didn't know where to run to, but she knew that the Rosaria hotel building had only one floor, but a staircase to the second floor appeared in front of her. The rules stated that if they came across an ajar door while walking down the hallway, it was best not to even look in it. The girl realized that she needed to keep calm. She intended to find the door that would bring her back. Sylvia started knocking on the first door she could find, begging for help. But the rules said that if someone started knocking on the door, you shouldn't open it. The student went through several numbers this way, and suddenly she still managed to get through to one. Decline saw Sylvia in front of him, assuming she was lost, and was glad to see him. She thanked him and explained that she had gotten out of bed and suddenly found herself in the corridor. The man replied that amazing magical phenomena were constantly occurring in Berkt, assuring her that the place was full of spirits who had lost their minds because of magic. He said that she should have studied the rules more thoroughly. Sylvia noticed the unchanged appearance and unwavering gaze, assuming that the man could only open the door because he was Declan. The girl noticed a spirit appearing in their room. It started growling angrily. She tried to move away from it. The professor asked her not to move. She didn't quite understand his intentions, but decided to trust him. Declan used magical power to get rid of this demon, and he succeeded. Sylvia was surprised to see that the professor had managed to destroy it with a single spell. The professor didn't understand why he was so surprised, because it was just ordinary magic designed solely for destruction. The man assured that there was nothing to be proud of, for magic was created for something else entirely. Sylvia noticed the flowing flame the professor assured that she had correctly named it. Afterwards, she faithfully detected lightning metallization magic and goblin fire. The girl was a little upset that the professor didn't even look at her. The student decided to do something deliberately after her sleeves. She used magic, asking what he thought about it. Declan replied that it wasn't bad, assuring that there was a slight instability in this magic circle, consisting of the air she put into the flame. The girl asked the professor what exactly was the cause of this instability. Declan stated that it was up to her to figure out on her own. Sylvia pointed out that he had helped Ifrin, and she was refusing. The professor responded that Ifrin had done fine on her own. The student was outraged by this response. The teacher advised the girl to curb her impatience, but didn't quite get it. Declan assured her that time was on her side, and if she continued to work at the same pace, she was sure to get stronger. Sylvia was advised that there was no need to rush in this matter because there are only 3 people in this world with this level of talent. People recognizing Sylvia's power were sure she had a bright future all her life. She had heard similar phrases. The girl thought it was hypocritical and stale flattery, but she didn't understand why Declan's words sounded any different. After a while, Sylvia managed to fall asleep peacefully. The professor continued to read the book. By chance, Declan noticed an aura that began to enter their room through the window and decided to check where it was coming from. Suddenly, Kim Woojin felt the magnate's action on this mountain path was very difficult to get to, and the occasion of Berkt's gathering was an exceptional opportunity. He assumed he had managed to find a rarer item here than he had realized. The spirit discovered the lost man and rushed toward him to frighten him. A magical spirit appeared next to the professor, but the man did not react to it. The spirit tried to draw attention to himself in every way possible to intimidate him, but Declan kept walking on as if he didn't notice him. Declan stopped and asked the spirit if he had seen any item that held a large amount of mana. Suddenly, the spirit uttered some words in an unknown language and began to leave the professor. Declan didn't realize what was wrong with him, but he noticed that the spirit was starting to come back to him quickly. The professor saw that he had brought him this object. He didn't realize at first what it was. The system reported that it was a purified fragment of a mana tree. This tree was naturally rich in mana, but due to the lightning strike, its fragment was purified and now turned into an excellent material. After arriving in this world, Kim Woojin tirelessly practiced and conducted various researches. Because of Declan's ordinary talent, he felt limited. The player realized that if he could craft a staff from this wood, it could help him reach the required level of strength a little faster. The meeting became tense. Bedina thought the Redskins were demons because of their blood, but Declan called it nonsense, and gave the example of sugar and water, saying if you add a little sugar, does the water become just sugar? The heated argument between Declan and Bedine dumbfounded all the other mages. They didn't understand why Declan would want to protect the Scarletborn. Some seemed to think that this plan had gotten support from him in the first place. Giltian also thought he would take this approach. He was curious as to what Declan was up to. Sylvia was sure that her father wasn't the only one who thought that Declan was protecting the Redskins for some selfish motive. After last night, the girl realized that everyone present was simply wrong, for among them, Declan was the only one who spoke the truth. Dissectant stated that rather pointlessly arguing, he believed they would not be able to come to a consensus on the topic. The elder offered to return to the Scarletborn a little later, but for now asked to move on to the next discussion. After that, the mages had no problems with the rest of the topics, and that was the end of their protracted meeting. Kim Woojin realized that he had done everything in his power for the future of his main assignment, but he had incurred the disfavor of some members of the meeting. The next day came, and the professor visited the shopping district of Berkt. He entered one of the famous market stalls. Declan intended to craft his staff before he left Berkt. He would choose the right materials to craft. Suddenly, Alan started calling for the professor. The man asked what was wrong without taking his eyes off the material. Alan said that his savior had come to his rescue, and he was only able to get here safely because of her help. Declan knew it was the girl Deputy Bureau of Investigation, Chief Lily Fremian. They said hello to each other. Afterward, they decided to take Lilia out to dinner to thank her for helping Alan get to Berkt. Lily thanked the professor for the treat. She apologized, assuring him that she had to ask him a couple questions to complete her investigation. The girl intended to find out what happened to the bodyguard. Veron professor replied that he died during the attack. Lilia was curious to know what made this professor different from other mages like him. Earlier within the Empire, the Imperium Lokar's Bureau of Investigation said he would be sent to Rekordik for taking the lives of so many mages. Lilia Fremyan asked if the offender had any objection to this, and he remained silent. The girl was surprised that he only stopped talking when he entered the interrogation room. The deputy pressed the criminal to activate his ability. Lockhart followed Lilia Fremyan's order and activated his power. A magical eye formed over them. Lily Fremyan was furious. She intended to find out why he had chosen to besmirch their reputation again. The girl asked Lockhart not to do anything stupid, but he only laughed in response. Lily was going to finish him off because if anyone found out he was one of them, their ill-wishers would take advantage of it. Lockhart was surprised that she actually believed that their race could command a peaceful life in the Empire. Lilia assured that if they didn't manage to find out who he really was, the man said that their race was born with a devilish gift, which is why people fear them. Lily pointed out that the Scarlet-born are not the only ones who received the gift at birth. The girl asked why he'd attacked Decline in the first place, since they'd already been following the Ukline family. Lockhart suggested that she was planning to ruin Declan. Lily replied that they were just watching him for now. The Deputy Bureau of Investigation assured that if this scumbag continued to behave in the same manner, she would find no reason why he should have been kept alive. The perpetrator asked her not to, informing her that Declan was a true aristocrat and should not have been touched. Lily didn't understand what to make of it, since Declan had committed a large number of crimes despite his status. The elegance with which he spoke of the Scarlet-born being human, not demonic, and that look of certainty lodged itself firmly in Lockhart's memory. He was sure that if there were more aristocrats like Declan, they would live in peace. Lockhart informed Lililil that the professor did not destroy him, even though he was of his origin. She was surprised by this. Lilia asked if he was aware that Declan's ancestors stood for and spearheaded the ideas of genocide and oppression of the Scarlet-born criminal. Answered in the negative. Lockhart said that if they treat him the same way as his ancestors just because he has their blood in him, it will only justify their theory that they are demons. The girl ordered him to stop being clever. The man pointed out that she was able to hide her origins given her position. Lilia assured that redskins could not be distinguished by their appearance or even by blood tests. The girl did not forget about the food they were not allowed to consume, just avoiding it. She knew the emperor was not in the best condition. Lilia assumed that a new ruler would soon ascend the throne, and they only needed to keep an eye on what each of the contenders thought of the Scarlet-born. The girl explained that this is why Lockhart should shut up and stay out of the record act. Lily couldn't understand what it was that made Declan a true aristocrat. She was sure he was a common scoundrel. Suddenly, a guy who reeked of alcohol approached them, and Lily covered her nose from the odor. Decline assured her he had nothing to say to his guest. Ilham, noticing his acquaintance, decided not to miss this opportunity, and so he approached them. The man stated that he really wanted to hear something from Declan. It was something from the depths of his dark and dirty heart. Meanwhile, an incident with Veron had been reported to the Order of the Knights of Freyheim. Captain Julia couldn't believe it because she thought Veron was the strongest of the knights. The vice captain had a hard time saying it, but he reported that Veron had died on his mission. Julia couldn't utter a word of this news. She tried to gather her thoughts. The captain ordered her aide to make all the necessary preparations. She intended to hear an explanation from Declan as soon as he returned. Meanwhile, Decline and the others intended to eat lunch until Ilham approached them. Lily knew that this man is the current head of the Revine family. She didn't understand what was going on. Ilham stated that Declaim had managed to catch him off guard during the meeting. He didn't understand why he was doing all this, but at the same time feared one of the magical families. The acquaintance asked the professor why he suddenly decided to side with the Scarlet-born. Lilia couldn't believe her ears. The man assured him that Declan himself had been the one to suggest their destruction not so long ago, and long before that had said that inferior species had no right to live. Ilham was sure that those documents in which the professor condemned the Redskins were still at the university. The acquaintance suggested that Decline had found himself a Scarlet-born slave who was doing research. Instead, Alan ordered Ilham to stop making such remarks toward the master. The professor asked his assistant to rest, assuring him that everything was fine, pointing out that Ilham's brain was like rotten cheese, so he wasn't surprised by his thoughts. The man said that the research presentation was only 6 months away, stating that they would see if Decline could do anything but talk. Lilia made sure that Decline behaved similarly, even at the risk of offending the rest of the meeting, by suggesting that she was indeed on the side of the Scarlet-born. The girl couldn't believe that the professor had changed so much. She found it hard to believe such a thing. The investigating deputy made sure that Lockhart's words were indeed true. The next day came before leaving. Burke Decline met with one of the greatest artisans and ordered a staff from him. Kim Woojin made sure that Declan had visited this artisan in the past, and because of that, he was able to fulfill a quest unknown to him. Then on the way back, all the mages were put into one wagon. Bedin was out of his mind. Baden didn't even think to hide his hostility towards the others, but luckily it didn't turn into anything. The professor realized that this long journey was finally coming to an end. Alan informed Declan that they had one last transfer ahead of them, assuring him that they would finally see something other than snow. The boy noticed that they were already met by Julia along with the rest of the guards. Alan hadn't expected to see her here. Julia reported that she had already heard that their train had been attacked, assuring that she was glad they were unharmed. Decline thanked him for those words. He was sure she was already aware of what had happened with Veron. Seeing the faces of the knights, the professor realized that they were not happy that he had managed to survive and Veron hadn't. The girl said she learned about the incident from a newspaper article that said the two of them worked together to save the survivors. Julia only wanted to know one thing. As Veron revealed himself, the professor noticed her look of hope on him. A silence formed between the two for a while. Kim Woo-jin intended to view this situation correctly. At first, the player planned to tell Julia the truth about Veron trying to send him to the other world. The man realized that in the situation that happened, he could have been killed. He also wanted to be honest with her. Finding himself in front of Julia, Decline saw the look in her eyes and couldn't tell her the truth. It seemed to the player that it was better for the captain of the Knights not to know the truth of Veron's behavior, for that truth was extremely cruel. Kim Woo-jin realized that her beliefs were unshakable but not her heart, because that was her true nature. The man suggested that if Julia knew the truth, she would certainly blame herself for it, believing that her subordinate's misconduct was directly her responsibility. For her sake, Declan decided to keep the truth from her, even if it meant incurring someone's hatred. The knights looked hatefully at the professor, who continued to remain silent. The conductor announced the start of boarding the trains bound for the Empire. All passengers were asked to enter their cars immediately. Declan replied that he found it difficult to answer her question, pointed out that Veron was extremely emotional. Julia thanked him for his answer. The knights were going to the place where he had died. She wished the professor a good rest. Kim Woo-jin realized that he himself was a fool who couldn't understand the feelings in Declan's heart. Alan asked if there was any logic in their actions. The professor didn't understand what he was talking about. The guy explained that they were also victims of the incident, and the knights looked at them as enemies. The professor advised him to just ignore it. Alan asked why he held back. Suddenly, Decline noticed that Sylvia had approached them and was also looking at him unhappily. The girl reached into her bag and pulled out a book she asked to accept as a thank you. After the student, without explaining anything, ran off to her wagon, Alan asked the professor what it was. The trip had exhausted Declan, and he wanted to get home and get some rest. After a while, the train arrived in the capital, where everything was dotted with multicolored colors unlike in the north. Officially, it was reported that during the first attack, Professor Decline took control of the situation, and together with Veron, they managed to save the survivors, but during the second attack, the train collapsed. The knights learned that their partner had fallen to the bottom during the second attack, but the VIP carriage in which Decline was in was surprisingly hanging from one of the rocks. It became clear to everyone that they were both doing their best to take control of the situation, but Mr. Veron collapsed during the second attack. Julia thanked the investigator for giving them such a detailed account of what had happened. The knights asked if any of Veron's belongings were left behind, but the investigator answered in the negative. The man said that they do not ask questions regarding the incidents that occurred on the way to Berkt, and therefore do not know who was behind it all. Julia realized she'd lost her trusted assistant, but she didn't think he'd leave her like this. Returning home, Declan was met by a disgruntled Juriel, who didn't understand why he was writing a check on their family again, foolishly tried to calm my lady down. Juriel assumed that her brother had forgotten that their family's financial situation was very bad, saying that at this rate they wouldn't last 2 months. The staff was much more expensive, which is why Kim Woo-jin was forced to write that check. He learned that their family's finances would only last for 2 months. Decline asked his sister to calm down, assuring her that he knew where he could get the money. After they sewed in the treasury, where there were many rare items, Juriel didn't understand what he was up to. She asked what he was going to do with the items bought at the auction. She thought her brother had bought them, just to show off. The man asked her to shut up for a minute and advised her to express herself in a more feminine manner. Juriel was outraged by his words because he had caused their family bankruptcy. At first, Kim Woo-jin didn't understand why the auction items had the energy of a tycoon emanating from them. He thought they were an investment just like in the real world. However, as time went on, a thought occurred to him, and he realized how he could increase his wealth with these items. Decline used Midras's touch. Juriel didn't understand why he was standing with his arm outstretched for so long. Brother said he was going to auction these items, again asked sister to call an appraiser. Juriel was surprised at this because it was customary to keep antique things as long as possible, assuring that now he would only get half the price. The man asked Raul to get an appraiser immediately and then help him with transportation of all of his belongings. The vase was created by the magical talent of a fine artisan who put his heart and soul into it. The potential of this vase was awakened by Midas's touch. Decline was sure that a vase worth about 2.5 million elene had become an object he didn't want to part with. After the movers came in for transportation, the professor asked them to be extremely careful. Juriel asked if her brother was really going to sell all these items. The man assured that they would certainly make money from the sale of these items, then he said he had to go to work. Meanwhile, the students sat in the room of the simple magic study club and played cards. Ifrin showed everyone that she had a full house combo, with King's comrades were shocked by this. The guy said it was the third win in a row Ifrin girl won, and now she could stay clean for a week. Julia pointed out that she was so close to winning. Ifrin stated that excuses are for losers. What was going on was like a dream. Ephraim came from a baron's family, but didn't even graduate from the academy. Since she entered this tower, she had been receiving endless streams of hatred in her direction. It was not only about students, because even professors disliked the student. Ephraim had been through a lot, and she never thought she would be sitting in a club with her friends like this. The comrades decided not to play cards anymore, since only one Ephraim is lucky. The girl stated that she really liked the name of their club, calling their club for commoners, but the friend pointed out that their club was called the Simple Magic Study Club. Suddenly, a professor walked in who overheard their conversation. He thought it was illiteracy. Rellin didn't realize what they were even doing in this club. They didn't expect to be heard. The aide assured the professor that everything was exactly as he had told him. These commoners were just occupying a place in the magic tower and not really doing anything. Ephraim didn't expect Professor Relly and Becca to show up at their door. The two of them were prying into people of common blood at every opportunity. The professor didn't understand what the point of a club for studying simple magic was, so he tried to find out what they were doing here. This was about the reaction the student had expected from Rellin, deciding she needed to handle this in a more professional manner. Ephraim said that they had filled out all the necessary paperwork and received permission to create the club because one of the professors had given them his consent. Rellin decided to find out who had the good sense to approve the creation of a somewhat useless club. The professor recognized that this was the commoner who had recently been on the disciplinary board. Ephraim was angry that he was back to calling her a commoner, which she was not. Rellin noticed her arrogant expression. He declared that she dare not look in his direction like that. The professor ordered the student to immediately turn away. Julia tried to calm Ephraim down so the situation wouldn't escalate. Rellin ordered to answer the question, for he was not that any of the professors had actually approved the creation of such a club. The man didn't wait for an answer and decided that they had simply deceived him, because no professor would do that. Suddenly, Decline intervened in their conversation and claimed that he was the one who gave them permission to club. It was Decline who gave them his permission. He asked if Professor Rellin had any objections to that. Decline stated that Rellin's screams were heard from across the hall. He wanted to know his claim students were silently watching this. First, Juriel hadn't left him alone from the beginning, and now that Decline was already on the job, this professor was causing trouble here. Kim Woojin noticed that Rellin was pouring vile sweat in 3 streams. The professor hurriedly assured the Lord that this was not what he meant. Rellin said that he thought the room was too shabby and the students didn't take that hint. The professor explained that he thought that mages deserved better equipment and furniture. Professor Rellin indicated he would take over and replace everything with better stuff. The interlocutor stated that the professor was always so courteous, making sure that the room did indeed look old and shabby. Decline stated that worthless cockroaches will behave like insects. It had been a long time since Professor Declam's last class students were wondering why he had traveled to Brecht. Sylvia listened to her classmates talk about the incident that was even in the newspaper. Some students thought the professor might have told them what happened to him on the trip. Decline asked for silence in the classroom. He decided to start the lecture and used telekinesis to pick up the chalk. The professor said that the first topic of today's lecture would be called Pure Elements and Magical Interference. Magical interference is when one magician's spell was interrupted by another magician's interference. Decline stated that before they move on to the main part of the lecture, they will start with a warm-up exercise. The students noticed that their classroom was filled with a large number of mono stones. The professor explained that they were magic stones worth 3,000 elne apiece, and he was going to leave them hanging in that position. The students had to try to retrieve them by interfering with his telekinesis. Decline assured them that if they succeeded, they could keep the stone for themselves. Afrin was excited to hear that they could make some money. The professor said that blocking interference is as important to the spell reader as the spell itself, and the defender has an advantage in this situation, but they should still try. All the students started to try to take the magic stones away from the professor, but no one succeeded so far. Kim Woojin had stopped and lifted the train into the air last time. However, he had only recently memorized basic telekinesis and needed to use it more and get used to it. The player was also a bit curious to see how long his telekinesis could last against 150 mages. The developer wanted to see how Declan could stand up to kids with top-tier talent. Ephraim had become convinced that these magical resources were very expensive, and her sponsorship funds had almost run out, and now she wanted to get her hands on this stone. Sylvia remembered what the professor had told her about Ephraim learning everything on her own. The student decided that she wouldn't lose to Ephraim. They persisted and kept trying to take the magic stones. Some of the students began to tire and give up, realizing that it was beyond them. Alan stated that the professor was incredible. He left no gap in the defense, even against 150 opponents, and the students couldn't make the interference at all. Kim Woojin was also astonished. He didn't expect that the students would hold on to their bloody noses to the end and use up all their strength, even though it wouldn't have any effect. Suddenly, the professor sensed that someone had still managed to take the magic stone away, first with Sylvia. Decline praised the student for managing to be the first to commit. She was a little embarrassed by the praise. The professor expected Sylvia to do that, so he didn't react violently. Declan noticed that she was the only one who had succeeded in doing this. The other students kept trying. Suddenly, the professor sensed that someone else had succeeded in taking the crystal. Sylvia was surprised that someone else had done it. Declan noticed that the second to pick up was Ifrin, who was visibly tired but happy to have gotten 3,000 elne. The professor noticed that a lot of students were out of energy. Let them finish this test. The man was sorry to see the others. He suggested they take a break, asking them to clean up the mess in the classroom. Julia asked how Ifrin had managed to do it, assuming he couldn't pull it off in a lifetime. Her friend replied that she'd had an epiphany, saying she'd had an epiphany because she knew a little about telekinesis, but when she tried to break through Declan's magic, it felt like something had snapped. Julia was surprised by this. She became a little envious. Sylvia had overheard their conversation unintentionally. It seemed impossible to Sylvia because the one who had gotten the lowest grade in the previous exam had come in second, and she was sure that Ifrin had not used any special approach. The girl realized that the rumors about Declan leaving work late because of his sessions with Ifrin were true. It seemed to the student that the professor had lied to her. Sylvia didn't understand what he found in such a stupid person. The girl made sure that Ifrin, despite her worthlessness, was stubborn. After the break was over, Declan explained to the students that in this assignment, they had made every effort to perform magical interference. However, there was an easier way to counter his telekinesis. The professor assumed that those who succeeded already understood the method he was talking about. The man reported that this method is mana interference. Mana interference is opposed to the most common method, which was to block spotted magic. This method involved understanding another person's spell and interrupting it. However, the reason why this method was not universal was that it had too many limitations. One of the guys suggested that it could only work if he had knowledge of enough different magic circles. The professor replied that the use could only be possible on the magic they studied, and it was not recommended for use practice, showed that barrier or other spells were used for protection. Declan added that there is no water under the bed, and they all used this opportunity to fully understand mana interference. The problem of the technique was to find the central chain of the magic circle. The central chain is a part of the magic circle. Its type depended on the type of spell and the element that was used. The students needed to understand what central target their opponent was using and interfere with it. And if they mastered this mana technique, it would become much easier for them to perform magical interference. The professor decided to teach them how to distinguish the central circuits of most magic circles. The man explained that to begin, they would examine the magic circle called the Storm Spear Blade. The destructive type of magic always possessed a center chain that could explode from within. Students then reviewed the supporting spells they were all outlining. The professor noticed that the time for the allotted lecture was over, though they still had some material to work through. Declan stated that they all wasted a lot of time. He asked the students to figure out the rest on their own. The teacher said that the midterm is coming up, but before that there will be an open practical exam. Julia wondered why the professor left without finishing the material. They had a feeling they had stopped halfway through. Ifrin today felt as if an epiphany had come over her, and it was hard to describe it in words. Suddenly, Beck turned to Ifrin, suggesting that she imagined the faces of the commoners who would learn that she was able to obtain such a magical stone. Julia didn't understand why Hisanova started an altercation by hurting the commoners. The girl pointed out that last time he'd brought Professor Reland to them, assuming that he was picking a fight with them. Beck asked Ifrin what it was that made her go from last in her class to second. The girl realized that she must not care what he said. She assured him that even if she told him, he wouldn't believe it. The boy assumed that she was able to bribe the professor without even belonging to a noble family. Such statements made Ifrin lose her temper. The girl questioned what he had said, making it clear that she intended to punch him for saying that. Noticing her reaction, Beck thought he was right because everyone knew she had been taking private classes with the professor. Ifrin assured that she had done no such thing. Sylvia overheard their conversation. The guy asked the girl to explain herself. In such a case, he was sure that she was a fool who hadn't finished the academy and didn't understand how she managed to become stronger so suddenly. Beck assumed the professor felt sorry for her, and it seems he gave her the Mana Stone as a gift. The student pointed out that since Ifrin had no home or parents, she could not have become so strong. The girl was furious at such words, saying that if he said one more word, he would not be well. The boy replied that he wasn't afraid of her silly threats. Ifrin suggested he test his strength. Julia asked her friend to leave Beck alone and ignore his insults. The girl pointed out that Ifrin could be punished again, and she made sure Julia was right. Ifrin remembered Declan's words that mages should always remain calm. The student thanked her friend, stating that she was right as she was just a little overworked. Ifrin was convinced that she had momentarily lost her mind, trying to maintain a conversation with the fool. Julia was glad she was back to her senses. A friend suggested we go to the cafeteria and grab something tasty for the road. They left the class. After a while, Ifrin realized she had held back in the altercation thanks to Julia, but didn't understand what to do about Beck. He was very angry that he couldn't just stand by anymore. The girl wondered what he should do with this nobleman. She noticed that there was someone standing around the corner. Sylvia approached Ifrin and intended to talk to her. The latter was surprised by this.